minutes for people to file in. We're live. We're live now. Everybody, welcome to the show. I see that there's a bunch of people already in here, and well, we'll see more people file in as they get the notification. And this is a good time actually to tell people how this is all going to run down. David, I want to thank you for coming on to the show. People don't know you. Your name is David Charalambous, and you're a behavioral researcher. How does that work?
Yeah. So basically, we label it as behavioral and communication expert.
Okay. Well, we're going to get into all of that. So no need to dive into it too much at the moment. I want to thank everybody for coming out. It's an impromptu stream today, but I gave everybody the heads up yesterday that this was going to happen, and a few little sneak peeks throughout the week earlier. So we should see a lot of people coming in. I put the notifications out on Twitter and Discord. If anybody saw that, please leave a comment in the chat where you got the notification, because that it helps me to target where I should be targeting. If more people are getting a notification in a different place, then I can start tweaking things in either the algorithm or in just how I present things. So it's always helpful. But so here's the rundown. Here's how it's going to go. This is not dissimilar to how we do the Marty and Clyde show. We'll be talking for a good I want to say 50 minutes to an hour, somewhere in that ballpark. And then we'll take questions from the chat. So if we're not addressing your comments and you're thinking, hey, what the heck, Clyde, what's going on with that? Well, that's the reason. That's the reason, because we're going to set that time aside at the very end. That's when the Q&A comes in. And besides, you're going to have way more questions after we have this chat than you will at the very beginning. So this is why we'll be addressing those at the very end, because this one's going to get intense. And I have a feeling, David, that this is going to be like one of many chats, because we're only going to be touching the surface for most people. Yeah. But this is going to be a bit of an introduction. And then I'm going to have to, in future chats, just refer to the first chat for people to go back to if they're not up to speed on where everything's going. Because it is, what you do is very intense, and it's amazing, but you got to keep up. It really is like that. So yeah, without further ado, hey, there's a bunch of people in the chat already. For every newcomer that comes in, if people are asking in the chat, why aren't they addressing the chat? Just explain to everybody else who's coming in. And again, don't forget to hit the like button on the way in. It helps the channel a ton, and it gets the algorithmic juices flowing, and it gets more people introduced to this content, so that more people can be notified of just how you're being brainwashed, which is what we're going to get into here. All right, so let's get going. David Charalambous, thank you so much for joining me today. This is a real pleasure. It really is. We spoke last week, and we started getting into it. Big regretful I didn't hit the record button. We were just having a private conversation. But you're really, what you do is really in depth. Now, can you explain what is it that you do, and how is it that you've become here? Because I watched your presentation last June in Victoria, and I'm just mind blown. So explain.
Well, it goes back pretty much 25 years. So I've been studying perception, psychology, and for the last 5 years, behavioral science. Really, that question is, why do we do what we do? Why do we think the way that we think? And something very bizarre happened in March 2020, because I considered myself very experienced in the field, and I considered that I could debate really well. And all of a sudden, talking to people just went crazy. You couldn't reason with people. And I was like, whoa, something's happened here. So then I pretty much, and how serious what was going on, I pretty much created a project called Reaching People, and locked myself away, and pretty much went through all the research, all the latest books. And what it was about understanding all the concepts about how they've mapped out how we work, creating little pieces of the jigsaw, and then putting those pieces together. So then we've got a picture of how people are functioning. And it's been like super rewarding to understand myself better. But then to watch how the world is working, it has been really surreal. And then there was just a really intense need to share that with people, because people are having opinions and concepts, and they're not realizing that someone's been hacking their mind, you know, in so many different ways.
So this is crazy. So the reason why I got in touch with you at this timing is Canada's going through another one of these things. And I feel like it's a mass formation psychosis of some sort of type. And immediately as I saw it happening, your presentation came to mind. And I was like, okay, I got to get in touch. Is this what's happening now? Because because of, well, Trump derangement syndrome. We all know what that is, TDS. Well, it's hit Canada very hard. And it's because of a series of tariffs that Donald Trump has put on, and it's caused this new trade war that our politicians are gleefully engaging in, because it's brought them a reason to bring new fervor to their cause or to their party or to their brand and all of this. And it really is reminiscent of the COVID era. I mean, we've gotten to the point where, they're covering alcohol bottles in the liquor stores that are American made, just, to tell people that they can't purchase these items. People are getting angry at Americans. People are, I've heard reports of people trying to force Teslas off the road because they don't like Elon Musk. This kind of thing. It's really like, it's beyond the pale. It's not normal behavior. And I wanted to get to the bottom of this. So let's just dive in. What causes people to do this? How do people become so fervent like this?
Well, it's really well understood how people congregate into groups and how then this sort of discrimination will happen. And it was Henry Tajfel in the UK studied this after the Second World War. And he's like, well, what makes people congregate into groups and then compare themselves to other groups and then basically do some horrendous things as well? Yeah. So they were looking at, is it culture? Is it racism? Is it any of these things? And it turned out that it actually doesn't matter. All it needs is a name. So all you need to do is create a group, give that group a label, then have people identify with one of the groups and then compare the two groups. That's all you need. That's it could be eye color. In a classroom, one teacher, she says, because they were obviously experiment with this to explain to the children. And she says to them one day, she says, oh, by the way, we've got all the latest research. It turns out that everyone with blue eyes is more intelligent than brown eyes. So then what you had, these two groups formed, and then the blue-eyed people were looking down on the brown-eyed people, and, sort of conflict and all these things start to occur. And then they come in the next day and she says, oh, sorry, I got it wrong. It's actually the brown-eyed people are more intelligent than the blue-eyed. So, and then the same thing happened. It flipped. Now, people don't realize that we're very tribal. I mean, a lot of people probably realize you've only got to take any sport in any country and take two major teams. Mm-hmm. And then you'll have people literally disliking another person just because of the team they support. And then it'll be, and then the comparison comes in. So first it's label, then it's identity, and then it's the comparison. Oh, you're an idiot. Okay, so if you notice how you'll talk to someone, and if you hold an opinion contrary to what they're telling you on the media, then suddenly it's like, oh, you're an idiot. And it's so crazy. And of course, my response to that is say, may I ask how you came to that conclusion? Because what you're there, it's actually a really important question, because what you're doing is, if you say why, by the way, in this context, why is a question you never really want to ask someone, because the reason is they actually don't know why they're responding the way they do. So if you ask them why, all they're going to do is rationalize, and they're going to give you the buffet of excuses that the media will provide for you. So why is never a good question. If you ask them to explain their reasoning, they can't. Because in fact, they don't know, because it's a house of cards. It's not built on any foundation. And this is why everyone, it's like how you get angry mobs. I mean, do you remember the conference we was at where we met? You remember the protesters, and people would ask them, why are you here? And they said, they're spreading hate. So what did they say? Oh, I don't know. They've just told me.
They had no idea.
It's like, well, if you don't know, how do you know it's hate?
Well, the fascinating thing that you talked to me when we were having a private conversation just last week, is you told me that when people they have a belief system, and sometimes it's not structured, it's not built with rational reasoning, but then when it's challenged, this is the tool, this is the time that those belief structures actually get solidified when somebody challenges it. So then they have to rationalize. Yes. And once they've rationalized it, now the belief structure has a rationale behind it. It didn't before. They were just randomly believing it because of some outside stimuli. And that more intelligent people have better tools at indoctrinating themselves, essentially.
Yeah, they're more flexible in their rationalization. So the way it works is that we're not educated to understand how our brain functions, how we operate as an organism. And like Daniel Kahneman won a Nobel Prize for this, and he wrote a book called Thinking Fast and Slow, and I'm sure a lot of the viewers have read it or know of it. But there's so many different books of that ilk. And what it is really is that if we've got a piece of information that's coded from the sort of irrational part. So basically, if we've been drummed into fear and then we make a decision from fear, sometimes it can be irrational and it can be plugged into the system. Like you look at, I think it was Steve Jobs had a fear of buttons. Okay. Literally.
Oh, you really had it.
That is a thing. So there's many different phobias that to a lot of people doesn't make any sense. So the person, it also doesn't make any sense. But because they got such an intense fear, what happens is that we reason and we try to reason emotional responses. Okay. So an emotional response won't be rational. I mean, it will be survival instinct. So, if there's a snake coming along and so if a car drives, let's say you're in a country and they drive on the opposite side of the road and you don't realize and you go to step in the road, car comes and you jump back. Okay. People will go, oh, I saw the car and jump back. No. You automatically jump back before you realize what was going on, and then you try to rationalize what happened. That makes sense. So right. A big part of our system is an automatic response from the emotional. It's automated. So if I went to shake your hand, you wouldn't go, oh, he's raised his hand, I'm going to raise my hand, I'm going to move it forward. It's automatic. So what happens is that when processes get automated, consciousness drops out because it's not needed anymore. And that is a very efficient way to operate as a human being. The problem is when that idea has not had consciousness to assess it and it's wrong. So then the person's automatically responding to what you say, but they don't realize. That makes sense. So you might go, oh, have you seen this? And they go, oh, you're a conspiracy theorist. Okay. Now, that's been drummed in by repetition by the media, saying if anyone talks about this subject, conspiracy theory, this subject, conspiracy theory, this subject. So then in their unconscious mind, they've automated it. So then what you're doing is you're triggering this automatic response. Now, the mistake that a lot of people make is that when they're called a conspiracy theorist, and by the way, it's not easy to not get angry because the person's being completely irrational and they're calling you names for, sharing what usually is a complete fact. But they're not conscious. So that's the thing. They're completely unconscious. So they call you that. And of course, then if we respond with anger, then you just end up. So we have a saying on the project, which is don't step in the ring. Now, yeah, it's mighty tempting to step in the ring. And by all means, you're welcome to do so if the person's, been a complete arse. But you won't get anywhere. That makes sense. All you can do is argue with them, and and it's just, and what was it? There was one quote that says, don't argue with stupid people because from a distance they won't know who's the stupid one. So not stepping in the ring is really, really important. So what we're dealing with is really, and they've taken conditioning, which people call it brainwashing, but I think conditioning is a better word because brainwashing is that you're clearing the stuff away, which is what usually happens prior to the conditioning. So conditioning is really to create an association between two things to create an automatic response. That makes sense? So right. When you're talking to someone, they're responding, they are under the illusion that what they're responding with has substance to it. Okay.
Right.
And that's called basically they're responding from what's known as an IOED. And I won't talk about the complex term, but it's basically from an illusion. They're responding from an illusionary position. They think they've got the substance to their claim. And when you ask them, then they're going to hit cognitive dissonance. That's why it's really important to ask them in a friendly way if you can, contain yourself and not get angry if they're not being a complete arse.
Right. But then it's hard not to have your own, triggered responses.
Well, that's such a key thing. Exactly. But you see, that's also been conditioned into us.
Right, right.
Okay, so
because this is the thing. People are probably viewing into this, not only, you know, curious about how their fellow citizens are so whacked out, but but you know, how do I avoid this happening to me? How do I avoid this happening to my children? How do I avoid this happening to my loved ones? Right.
Well, we got a whole series of exercises that can decondition these automatic responses, and I've spent a lot of time on myself to do that. So I can have a conversation with someone now, and they can call me all sorts of names, and it's really water off a duck's back. That's not something that it's easy. You can't just decide to do that. So I could decide, like, oh, I can lift 30K in a bench press or whatever, but until I build myself up, I can't do that. So that's why we use a lot of exercises, because what's happened is that it's literally the perfect strategy for, you know, divide and conquer. That's it. You get two people to step in a ring, and they're never going to listen to each other. So there's no information exchanged. And what's really interesting is that it's almost, if you took the US, for instance, it's almost, from what I can see, like 45-45 each side of the main parties. And then you got the 10% which swings whoever's going to come in.
Yeah.
Now, that 45 and that 45, they will. Have you ever seen two politicians where the other one goes, oh, actually, that guy's correct, the other guy's got a point? Have you think about it? It's absolutely insane, isn't it? If you've got two intelligent people, well, supposedly intelligent people, shouldn't they agree on something? And this is what was interesting about the you know, whatever happened the last 5 years, is that they agreed on a lot of things for once in their lives, basically because they're both being, you know, funded by the same sources. But this is the key. Like, it's the amount of decisions that people make due to the party that they affiliate with or the person that's at the top of their group is incredible. You talk to, like, I was talking to someone on social media a few weeks ago who is an acquaintance, the most delusional person I think I've ever spoke to, like complete Labour supporter in the UK. So he's blaming the Conservatives for everything. And Labour here, I mean, Starmer is, I mean, you've probably seen bits and bobs.
He's a piece of work, yeah.
Yeah. He's literally renegaded on every single promise when he got in. And this guy's trying to defend him. It's like, surely it's undefendable, but it's not when they're so conditioned to support the group. It's so tribal. It's so ingrained.
Well, we see the same stuff here in Canada. I mean, you know, liberals are trying to change, or they're trying to give out this new impression of who they are as Trudeau has stepped down, and they have a new leader, Mark Carney, who I'm sure you're familiar with in the UK, right? But so he's up there, and they have this task of trying to convince Canada that they're an entirely new party, but it's all the same players. I mean, Carney was an advisor to Justin Trudeau, and the rest of them are all still there, and the cabinet's the same people. But yet somehow,
new and improved recipe.
Somehow everyone's eating the same gruel, but they just give it a stir. You know? That's all they did.
Well, this is the thing about tribes. Like, once people get attached to that group, it really doesn't matter what they do. They're going to view it. So you think about your favorite sports team versus another team. Not many people watch the game objectively. Okay.
No,
you know,
never.
And that's what you're saying, especially when emotion's involved. And that's why so much of the propaganda is through an emotional lens, because it will make someone irrational. I mean, some of the things people come up with, I mean, that gentleman I was mentioning about, I started talking to him, and then he goes, "Oh, you flat earther." And I'm like, go through every one of my social media channels. You will not see a single post about the shape of the earth. Like, it's not my field, and it's not something I would even comment on, but that was his media go-to. And I'm like, dude, like, what are you doing? Like it's good, but you can see where that all comes from, because what the media does a very good job at is they create this caricature of anyone that challenges the narrative. Okay. And then what happens is, if you say anything against the narrative, they respond emotionally. But then they will also go, well, they're a critical thinker. Well, you can't buy everything and be a critical thinker. It's like one or the other, like, you know what I mean? And a combination, really. But this is what's so incredible, because they are told that they're critical thinkers, or they like to think so. I mean, if you ask anyone, are they open-minded, you're going to get 99% of people say yes. It's just one of those things. You know, saying you're a critical thinker doesn't make you a critical thinker.
No, I always respond to that with I hope I am. I try. You know, at least I try to do
it's
that
a process,
the best
isn't
I
it?
can.
That's the thing. It's a process where you take a piece of information, and it's not that we're a critical thinker or not. It's, are we critically thinking? So there's times where, for instance, there's times where I don't critically think, because and we all do it a lot of time. We take shortcuts. So if I'm on holiday, say in Spain, and I walk past 2 restaurants and one of them's busy and the other one's empty, my shortcut in my mind is going to go with the busy one must be the better restaurant, okay? Because people in there. Now, that's a general heuristic that most of the population will have. Some people don't like busy restaurants, so they go in the quiet one just out of that and think, oh, it must be decent. But you see, what happens is that the restaurant owner gets all of his cousins to come down to make the restaurant look busy, and then he somehow puts off customers who are going to his neighbor. So that's what they're doing. They're hacking reality.
This is a real thing, by the way. In Japan, they hire people to stand in line at restaurants at lunchtime. And then people will jump, like the line will go like a block down the way while everybody else is not busy at all. It's unbelievable.
See, this is really hacking. So this is how they hack us. They know that we will make certain shortcuts because it's impossible to weigh up every piece of information. Okay, so they know we're going to take certain shortcuts. So then all the strategies are aimed at making us make the decision that they want us to make.
Right. And this is like, you know, innocently enough, it's to sell you products on one end of the things. But then it gets diabolical. It gets to the point where they're talking about politically influencing people instead of rationally having discussions about where we should be going as a country, kind of thing.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's really to the point of they're like, right, how do we get this policy in? I mean, there's a document in the UK called Mindspace, and any of the viewers can do a internet search. And if they put Mindspace space government, that document will come up as one of the first results. And what it is that the government wrote that document based on all of the behavioral science research, and they listed the 9 best ways maybe to influence someone. And the subheading of that document is influencing behavior through public policy. Right? It's like, hang on a minute, shouldn't you just be serving the public? Okay? Because it doesn't take a genius to work out that if the people in the positions of government have a local interest to them or the department to serve special interests or big corporations over the public, then the public are going to suffer. So, for instance, if the energy companies are funding the government, then you might end up with a situation where the energy prices are doubling and tripling as the elderly people are losing their winter allowance for heat, and the government thinks it's okay, which is exactly what's happening in the UK. Yeah, and then they just will sell us these lies, and they say, "Oh, we're going to stop it going up even further." What do you mean? We're like, how can it go up even further? It's absolutely insane, the prices. But you see, this is the thing. A lot of their rhetoric is really just to placate the voters, because their influence. I mean, incentives are one of the most important things. So basically, people will, when they're incentivized to do things, and of course, then the standard theory is, oh yeah, but they will do things within the law. Well, does that hold true? So look at Wells Fargo in the US. Okay, right? The Wells Fargo set up an incentive scheme that said, and that, I think they did it in such a way where the bank employee would get a lot of their income from bonuses, etc. And then it would be that they would get bonuses from opening a new account for an existing customer. Okay.
Okay.
So what happens? 5,200 employees commit fraud.
Right.
Right. So basically, what you have is that Bandera, Alfred Bandera, who was a brilliant researcher. He found that under 4 conditions, you can move up to 70% of the public's moral compass. So all you do is create the right conditions, and then you're going to see people lie, cheat, etc. For the 2/3. I mean, you learned the Milgram study. So 2/3 of people would literally push a button to electrocute someone if someone in a white coat told them to do so. The studies on banking are fascinating. So it turns out that if you get a banker to flip a coin in private and they get a bonus if it's heads and nothing if it's tails, if you don't remind them a banker, they generally won't cheat. But if you remind them that they're a banker, and it's called priming, they actually not only cheat, but they cheat more than prison inmates.
Why? Why is that?
Because the normalization within the bank industry is to cheat. It's the Wolf of Wall Street. It's the greed is good. It's dog eat dog. So what you find is that people's behavior is predominantly driven, or there's a big influence from the situation. So if you went with a bunch of mates on a weekend versus going to your nan's for dinner, you would act very differently, wouldn't you?
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
But we don't think about that, okay? So what happens is that when we're working in an environment, what happens is the environment will, in certain industries, will weed out the honest people. Okay, so what you've got in a lot of the regulation agencies and all these other things is that it's set up in such a way and rewarded in such a way that now whistleblowers are not, you know, thanked. They're in Australia, they're put in prison.
Yeah.
So what that does is that normalizes that people are scared to speak out. And that's what you see in the last 5 years. That when you, so basically our unconscious mind works by a very primal thing, which is move towards pleasure and away from pain. So if you make something painful, even though it's the right thing to do, a lot of people will move away from it. And then what they will do is they will give you, and sometimes it's a valid excuse. Well, I've got a family to feed for. You know, if I don't work, then I can't do that. And that's where they get people with the incentives and basically get people by the nuts, is that do as you say, do as you're told, or this happens.
Right. And in Canada, people are so perceptive to that. I mean, maybe under the surface, because you talk to a lot of Canadians, and generally they'll tell you, "Oh no, we're pretty strong people. We're strong-willed and we're defiant and all that stuff." But typically, people will roll over. I mean, that's kind of the stereotype of Canadians. At the end of the day, is that they're rollovers, and it happens far too often. What could be the cause of that?
Well, there's a lot of things, but it's really, if you're doing well at the current situation, you know, people don't bite the hand that feeds them generally. There is a thing that when there's a thing where something becomes so important, when it becomes an in-gamification, which a lot of, you know, manipulation is used by this, the theory of gamification is that once you have epic meaning or purpose, then you can't be bought. That's it. When you know, or this is why particularly a lot of people with strong religious or moral faiths, you know, I mean, you remember Arthur at the conference, like they tried him all different ways, but you can't. And he said, I've sold myself to God, so you can't buy me. So this is the thing. But you see, this is one of the problems with a lack of moral code, is that people can be bought. A lot of people can be bought. And really, if if the system has got a lot of those people in it, whatever it be, regulating agency or whatever, then you're not going to see people doing the right thing. You're going to see people pretending they're doing the right thing and saying they're doing the right thing. But it really, you know, I have a real strong rule, which is I'll judge a person by their actions. You know, talk cheap, you know, talk is cheap, really.
So like, there's a lot of this stuff. I try to look at the world as more chaotic than organized, because it typically is, right? Everyone has their own incentives. They have their things. You know, you'll point to the World Economic Forum. They have a goal. They want to, take over the world, whatever it is. Yeah. But that doesn't mean that everyone in their organization is on the same page. Doesn't mean that everyone in every government is on the same page. Everybody's reacting to incentives. And this is why I'm such a fan of the free market. I see it as like a bunch of different individuals making decisions and voting on what they would like or prefer to have available to them at all times. This is what you're doing when you go to the grocery store and you choose bananas instead of oranges. You know, you're making a vote on these things. But then you have people that are trying to influence these decisions, because they're obviously trying to sell you the bananas over the oranges. So you're buying the bananas because you think that you want the bananas, but somehow you've been conditioned to want the bananas. And this is a weird thing. So So there's been so many times in my lifetime where I'm like, you know what? I really want to get a bike. I want to get a bike and I want to ride a bike. And I don't know where I got this in my head. And then I turn around and all of a sudden all my friends just bought bikes too. And I'm like, wait a second, why? What happened? Why were we all into bikes and we all believed that we independently came up with that decision all around the same time? Where does this come from?
Well, there's natural tipping points that happen where somebody just does something and it looks really cool and then it gets a buzz or whatever. So in terms of, we've actually looked in all the studies around what makes things go viral. It's very interesting. There's certain elements to it. But what's going on now is that a lot of the things that go viral are designed to go viral. They're not going viral from, you know, a natural occurrence. And of course, a lot of the media plays a massive role in that. Now, you touched on something that's really important, is that in a free market, if all things being fair, what's really, really key is that incentives are aligned. When incentives are aligned, then you're going to see people doing good things, regardless, you know, of their true nature, because they're incentivized to do the right thing. But for instance, you take a big pharmaceutical company now, and I ask this question to a lot of people that are trying to defend them. I said, so if a big pharmaceutical company but profits above safety, would that be a problem? Okay. And then they go,
well, I mean, I don't know how many people would answer that profits are better than safety. I don't know. I don't know there would be anybody that say that.
Well, you'll get people ignore answering the question if they receive funding from the pharmaceuticals, because they know that I'm leading them down a path where they've got no defense. Right. But see, then they go, well, yeah, that's obvious. So the company you're trying to represent, do they have any criminal fines? And then you look them up and there'd be, you know, a huge amount of them. So what you're trying to tell me is that I should trust this company that has a criminal record, that has an incentive, that has this, on what merit? So see, well, that's the thing about the emotional response. You pound something through propaganda, someone's going to have that emotional reaction, and then they're going to try and reason why they're having that emotional reaction, but they don't know because it's in there from an emotional perspective. Makes sense? Like, I mean, when you look at the true beautiful things in life, you know, art and music, all these things, you can't really explain why you like something over another. And that's kind of the mystery and the beauty of a lot of it. But when it comes back to incentives, it's so key. And there's actually a book by a gentleman called Yuri Ganesi, and it's called Mixed Signals. And he's pretty much one of the world leaders as understanding incentives from behavioral science. So if you get the incentives crossed, you're going to see bad behavior, basically. That's what happens. So when, for instance, salespeople get bonuses, you know, for selling something to someone that doesn't need it, then you're going to see that occur. But the interesting thing about that is he said, you know, in his book, oh, I took the new medical product because I trust science. Now, that's ironic because he's written a book about mixed signals, and he's well aware of the mixed signals in the pharmaceutical industry, but yeah, he's going to trust them because he believes in science. Now, that is a classic example of an emotional response and reasoning your emotional response. Now, what you're going to see is a whole bunch of these ready, prepared, so-called reason responses to an emotional response. Now,
I know the one you're thinking. I think.
Right. So, right. I'll tell you the right. So,
yeah. Well, you know, I know I had like 7 of them already, and I got the thing that I wasn't supposed to get, but you know, it would have been so much worse if I hadn't taken it.
Now, people don't realize that that's not their idea. That has been drummed into them. Okay, because what happens is you can't remember everything that's happened during the day. It's impossible. So, and your brain knows this. It doesn't have the storage capacity. What it does is it takes shortcuts. So you get these feelings, you get these outputs. Now, this is so key. This next little bit is so key. So what it is that we can be influenced unconsciously and not realize that's happened, and then say that as though it's ourselves. So you remember that riddle I told you? Now, that's such a classic one. We could mention that now. Yeah. I said to you where, so you obviously know the answer to this now, and it's so obvious now you know the answer. But do you remember when you're like, I don't know?
I was completely, I didn't know the answer to it. So let's try this with the audience because the chat's in here right now. So
there's a And by the way, like, if you've already heard it, then obviously you're going to know it. But if you haven't, it's quite interesting. So there's a father and a son in a car crash. The father dies. The son's in a hospital, and in walks an old surgeon and says, "That's my son." Okay.
Yeah.
How is that possible?
How is that possible?
That's possible because the surgeon is the mother.
Okay? Yeah, I was right over my head, and
yeah,
I was thinking hard about that.
Yeah,
but so somehow I was conditioned to just think that a surgeon would be a man.
Here's what happens. Here's what happens. So basically, the picture in your mind's eye, unconsciously supplying to your consciousness, has a picture as the old surgeon as a man. Okay, that's it. It's literally, it's stereotyping. The stereotyping isn't a bad thing necessarily. It's how we get around in the world. It's basically saying, oh, this is generally that. So when you walk to a door that you've never seen before, you don't spend 10 minutes working out what it is. You generalize, oh, that looks like the thing I've seen. And it all happens unconsciously. And you walk up and you open the door. But what you've got is that variable was in your unconscious mind and you wasn't aware of it. You're now aware of it. Okay?
Yeah, absolutely. Now, and if I saw it visually, like a woman walking in, I wouldn't think, why is that woman a surgeon? Get back to the kitchen or something like that.
Exactly that.
That's not my thoughts.
Yeah,
but it just didn't cross my mind.
Well, I've asked, like, I've had interviews with scientists and like female scientists that have been surgeons who did not get that right.
There you go.
Okay. So it's not, but everyone initially feels bad that they got it wrong. But it's not. It's all it is it's stereotyping. Is that in your unconscious mind, you create this variable. Then you say this is this, and a lot of the time it's a shortcut. Okay. Now what happens is that if there's a whole school of body of science on this, and it's called narrative transportation theory, and it's literally, and then you've got all the conditioning, which is how they can create that unconsciously. So when you look at how the news reports on certain cultures and everything else, what they're doing is, if you're exposed to something so often, then it goes into the unconscious mind. And then when you're summarizing that data, that's where it's coming from. That's how a lot of prejudice gets created, by just mere exposure effect. So if you saw something happen, then every time that happened, it was, say, a cat did that, and then that thing happened next time, you think, oh, that's probably a cat.
Yeah.
Makes sense, because you're just using your experience. The problem comes is when you're not aware that experience is not accurate. Okay. Right. And that's where the media has such power, because they can make something that's not common look common, and then you'll think it's common. And this is where a lot of people's opinions are being described as being the popular opinion, or everyone thinks this way. And then what happens is, a large body of people will think that way because it's the popular opinion.
Is this like Donald Trump is a racist?
Oh yeah, they will just pound that in. I mean,
yeah, like measurably, he's not racist. I mean, if you look at his actions over decades, he's measurably not that. He's not a bigot or any of these stuff. Yeah. But it's just drilled in, and people just believe it.
Well, you see, I generally have a rule where I don't trust politicians, regardless, and then I judge people on their actions. But when I was talking to that person,
well, I'm not making the argument that Donald Trump's a nice guy. I'm just saying, he's
exactly that.
Not
you
that,
see, here's the key point: is that, and this is why I said that, because what happens is, the minute you will question someone, they automatically assume that you support the other person if you just question why they did that. And I was having a conversation with a behavioral scientist friend of mine the other day, and someone will say something about Trump, and then she say, "Can I ask you where you come to that?" "Oh, you're a supporter," and blah blah. She goes, "No, I'm just curious why you think that." So this guy was he's posting on his Facebook that, he posted like Tesla and saying, "Oh, it's the new logo is the swastika." Okay. And then I'm posting, and I'm not defending, either of the politicians overseas. And I'm going, but do you know what Starmer's doing? Because I know this guy is a big Starmer fan.
Right.
Oh, so you support Trump? I'm like, no. And he said, name one policy he's done well. Well, I can give you 7. Okay. So I literally because I know some of the policies, and obviously some of them I agree with. So I listed them out. And then his response was, well, I'm not going to look at those. Not even going to bother looking at those. Well, you asked me for my evidence. Where's your evidence? So what happens is that this, and I, it was funny because he said, oh, this white supremacist and all these things. And I'm like, okay, is that what the media is conditioning people to think? Because I'd seen it a few different places. So I thought, oh, that's what they must be going for. Because what it is you create these standard terms, conspiracy theorist, et cetera, and then what you do is that term is like a ready-made piece of mud to sling at someone. So then what you do is, and this is all conditioning, so then you create the bad thing, and then over years and years of conditioning, and then you put bad thing next to person, and then the person will think the two things are the same. So look at, and if you go back through TV series, you'll just see this subtly. So narrative transportation theory is really key to all of this, because it's literally the science of how to condition people to create associations. So if I said to you, why was Dirty Dancing written? Would you know? Most people wouldn't.
No, I'd only just make assumptions and then try to guess.
So the writer publicly admitted that she wrote the movie to make people more tolerant to abortion. Okay. Whoa. But that's the sub story. So when you look at narrative transportation theory, as an example, now all of them are bad. Like the Harvard Alcohol Project got together with ABC Studios in the 80s, and they wrote the term designated driver into Dallas and Dynasty and Cheers and all these different shows. So then that term entered the collective consciousness, and then people felt normal to say, actually, I'm driving, so I can't drink. Okay, because that's the thing. Society operates on a lot of norms. So what happens is that they will write these things in a TV series to get people to, because it's been shown that it really shifts people's opinions. So if you look back through lots of old TV series, you'll see that whenever they show a character that's a conspiracy theorist, generally they're obese, or they'll be very, low IQ. They won't be able to articulate themselves. A lot of time they're
unkempt, bad, poor hygiene, things like that.
Everything. So basically every bad characteristic about a person, the character takes. So then in the back of that person's mind, conspiracy theorist, low IQ, conspiracy theorist, low IQ. Okay. So then when something comes up and the media goes, oh, that's a conspiracy theory, they automatically think anyone that thinks that is stupid, and therefore you mustn't think that way. And that all happens outside awareness.
So it's all pre-triggered. It's set up like a elaborate Rube Goldberg machine, and it just sets off all these things in your head, and then you just come to a conclusion automatically.
Yes. So, and it's one of the most powerful things. So you look at any standard movie, they will use a series of scenes to get you to like the hero and hate the villain, and they do a very good job. So you'll literally feel, I mean, you look at the Mission Impossibles, and I can point out the scenes where there's a scene in one of them where
the guy's got a scar across his eye, or
but there's a woman, there's a female. Yeah, there's a scene in where they're in France and they're breaking someone out, and then there's a female police officer, and she spots them, and then Ethan Hunt saves her life, and then he does all this really sort of protective things, and you literally can feel the warmth towards the character. Because here's what's key. You can't consciously decide that. When you're seeing things, like if you saw, a burger drop into a piece of mud, like you can't decide to feel not disgusted. Like you feel disgusted. Like it's automatic response. And that's where the media has so much power. But people don't realize, and in fact, most people believe that they can't be influenced, and this is one of the most dangerous things, because I know I can, so I'm very careful about what I watch. And when I talk to behavioral scientists, they generally won't watch the news. If they want to find out what they're being misinformed about, they read it. Okay, because if there's there's studies that show if there's too many tickers on the screen, you can't take the information in, so you just go into completely receptive mode. And that's where, the best way to advertise to people is when they're just not sitting there thinking in it, because it's going in. And Richard Shotton wrote a book called
it's going in. Like this is something this is what a lot of people don't get. And I probably didn't understand this quite well until you articulated it, that it doesn't matter if you don't think you saw it, you saw it.
Yes. And that's where the mind magicians, you've only got to watch, there's a brilliant video on influencers where it's called Magic for Humans. and this guy invites 3 social influencers to a meeting, and he says, "Oh, I want to question you on how we can influence each other." He then gets them to go in different rooms. I'll give you the link. It's incredible. He gets them to go in different rooms in this. It's like a selfie palace or whatever. There's 20 different rooms, 50 different items, and they go into a room with an item, take a selfie. At the end of it, they've all taken the same selfie in the same room with the same tagline.
Yes.
Okay. Now, how does that work? So,
yeah,
you're at a party. Yeah, you're at a party. Okay. And there's half a dozen conversations going on around you. Okay. And then the minute someone mentions your name, what happens?
Oh, you look up and
you notice. Yeah. Okay. Now, what does that assume?
What does that assume? That somebody wants your attention, or somebody
but think
needs
about
you for something?
What must it assume about your brain?
Right. I don't know where you're going with that.
Yeah, well, this is where it's interesting, because it's only because people can't answer that question. And this is what it is. When you know something, it's obvious. But when you don't know it, you don't. This is known as the curse of knowledge, by the way. So if your brain is informing you when it hears your name, it must be recording all of those conversations. It must be listening to all of them. Because the minute your name's mentioned, see what's going on. There's a part of the brain called the reticular activating system. Let's call it the RAS for short. Now it's the security guard at the front door. Okay. And it's basically filtering all the information. And the minute your name gets mentioned, it flags it. And it says, right, Marty, conscious mind, someone's mentioned your name. Clyde, someone's mentioned your name. And then you notice. So basically what's going on, that is an example of what the security guard at the door is. It's got its filters. Right? It's got a list of information to let in and information to let out. So the media conditions that unconscious part of the mind to not let in these people, these pieces of information, and let in these pieces. And that's why 2 people can live
it's educating your security guard.
Yes.
That's what it's doing.
The security guard is the gatekeeper. It is probably one of the most important things for everyone to know, because if you've got the RAS set up, for instance, for poverty, that's all you're going to see. So basically, it reflects your belief system. So if you keep having the same events happen to you, you keep trying to solve them, but going round and round and round. I had this massively in a few things, and I managed to change it. I can give you a few examples. But basically, what's going on is that RAS is key, because it's literally filtering in and out. Now, what happens is that certain information will bypass that. Okay, so what's going on is that the unconscious mind is absorbing all the information. Then the security guard is filtering what your conscious mind needs to know about, but all the other information's getting into the club. Yes. So what happens is, so let me tell you one of the studies, and it will illuminate what happens. So they created this puzzle in a room, and the solution to the puzzle, there was 2 ropes, and the solution was to swing one of the ropes closer to the other and then solve the puzzle. Now, only 30% of people solved it. But what they did then, they gave an unconscious clue. So one of the study designers walked into the room and brushed against the rope. Okay. Now, and this is what Archimedes, when he goes eureka. So the story is he's sitting in the bath, and then the water rises, and then he goes, "Oh, I've got it." So what happens is, a lot of the time when you get those aha moments, something has happened in your environment to give you the piece of missing information that your unconscious mind will then put the pieces together and go, aha. That hasn't been unconsciously, but that doesn't take away the fact that your brain has solved it. So people want to consciously do things, but it's not easy. Unconsciously doing things is the way. So Wayne Gretzky, for instance, you know how they used to train him. His father used to train him to imagine where all the other players would be moving. So they'd done that so many times that it was second nature to him to guess where people would be. So it was repetition, repetition, repetition. So with that rope study, when the guy knocked the rope, another 30% of people solved the puzzle, but they didn't know why.
Right.
They couldn't articulate why. So what they have it is in a supermarket, if they did these studies where they had French and German wine, and then one day they played French music and one day they played German music, And then what happened was that on the day of the French music, 76% of people bought the French wine. And on the German music day, it's almost the same. Now, when those people were asked on leaving, did the music have any effect? 95% of them said no.
Because it's all subconscious.
Yes, that way it's all subliminal, so it's below conscious awareness. So if you can pound information into someone's mind, okay, you can then, to a large degree, predict what opinion they're gonna have. Because people say to me, why do I know what's going on? Because you expose yourself to better quality information, and that's what it is. So I'm of the opinion that we don't consciously decide, we don't come to our conclusions consciously. They're a result of all the processing of information. So if you put better information into the system, you're going to have better conclusions. It's just common sense. So the people that spotted something was wrong over the last 5 years, what happened is that they had for the most part, they had a contradiction that was so big that it alerted the RAS, the security guard at the door. So then the security guard goes door, says, hang on a minute, I've got to let some other information in here. And then the person would actively go looking for it. And then once that RAS is changed, they start seeing all the information that they previously ignored. For instance, have you ever had that experience where you buy a car like you've never purchased before, and then suddenly you see that car everywhere?
Okay? Yeah, it's not just cars, it's everything.
Anything. That's the RAS. So now the security guard is going, oh, I'm going to keep a lookout for this.
Right. I got that. I got that last summer. I bought a Hawaiian shirt, and I was like, oh, yeah, I never wear Hawaiian shirts. I'm going to get one. I never see these things. And then I saw everybody that's wearing them. But now, obviously, everyone has always been wearing them. I just didn't notice.
Exactly that. You didn't notice. So what's going on is that if you have two different people, so the RAS is really the filter system. So if you have two different people that come from two different political parties, they're going to see every event from a different perspective.
Right.
And that's how you can have...
That's incredible.
Yeah.
That's incredible.
You could literally have two people living in the same house, living two different realities, because they're looking at everything differently. If they're watching two different media channels, they're getting a different form of conditioning if those two different media channels have different people funding the programs or different ideologies or whatever it is.
So what's a way to actually reach people that are on the other side? And like, so like for one, immediately, as soon as you say that, I try to look introspectively. I'm like, yeah, what is it that I'm blinded by? And yeah, I'm, you know, am I somehow wrong? Maybe I should reassess my whole situation. But then also, like, how do you have a conversation with people? Because, you know, we all know that, especially when it comes to politics and religion, as soon as you challenge somebody on it, they dig their heels in, and then that's it. Yeah, there's no talking with them.
Yeah, so we've got a general rule is that your 3 tools for good critical thinking to get the other person to see a point are questions, stories, and metaphors. Unless you use those, they are very unlikely to change their position. But then there's the way I talk about it is that you're looking to get them to a rational perspective and to assess something as you would yourself. The first thing is, when you come with conclusions and thoughts, double check them. Okay. And then just objectively, because we're actually we're running a series of workshops on this, and we're going to build some checklists. So you basically you objectively, so I use checklists a lot, because when I send out an email for our group, because we do these free Zooms, and if I don't use the checklist, I will forget something. Okay. So I might forget the date, I might forget the Zoom or whatever. I'm not very efficient in that area. So I use a checklist. So the checklist guarantees that I'm going to have the information that I need to have in there. So basically, we have a checklist for critical thinking. And once you've done it enough times, then you will critically think. So basically, if I have a thought and then I go, right, is that really true? And then I can verify it with that checklist. So you're objectively checking your own thoughts. Because, for instance, when I work with a lot of clients on belief systems, because there's some incredible processes and techniques now that if someone wants to change a belief system that's not serving them, we can do so. So you might have a belief that will come up that someone says, oh, I don't feel good enough. And one of the things will be the imposter syndrome. Then the imposter syndrome is where the person knows they're good, but unconsciously they feel that they're not. And all that's happened is they've had some very early experiences where maybe their father was very a perfectionist and criticized everything they did. Okay, so then they develop a belief, I'm not good enough. And then what they may develop is a survival strategy that if I succeed, then I'll be good enough. Okay, so then they hyper succeed in a lot of instances, but they never feel successful. There's always a bit underneath because it's sitting on top of the other belief. That makes sense? So then the question is, if they feel I'm not good enough, what we say is, well, is that true? How do you know that's true? So then what we do is we find the sources of it, and then we question the source, and we give alternate interpretations, and then what happens is the belief weakens, and then we can reframe it so then they don't believe that anymore. But you can't just decide to go, well, I'm going to decide to feel good enough. And this is the problem with the positive movement, that it's, you know, positive vibes only. Well, that's impossible. Like,
wasn't that the secret that I remember there's
well, that's subtly different. Now those things,
okay. I never read it. I just I heard about it, and it was like positive vibes all the time.
It's subtly different, but a lot of the time people, if you do it on the surface, I'm just saying, oh, I'm gonna say, look in the mirror and say I'm a millionaire. If your mind goes, no, you're not, then that's not going to work. So what it is, it's getting, you know, it's, so basically there's three elements of mind. I give you a very simple metaphor that will really allow people to see, very simple metaphor to allow how we act and how we think about things. So you've got three things. You've got the conscious mind, it's the rider. The unconscious mind is the horse. And then they've got a map, like a computer. Okay. Now, if the map says Mars work, okay, the horse is going to move towards a mask. Okay. And then the rational mind is going to try and reason. So if you've ever tried reasoning with someone that wears a mask, the studies show they don't work, you're not going to get anywhere because it's emotional response. Okay.
Yeah. Right.
Now, if in the map it says money is bad or it's the root of all evil, the horse is going to move away from money. The rider is going to try and force the horse to move, but your unconscious mind controls behavior. So the horse in this analogy is the unconscious, it controls behavior. So if someone goes to put their hand in a fire, the hand's going to automatically pull back. It knows it's painful. So the horse moves towards pleasure and away from pain. So in the conditioning, all they have to do is condition the horse to move towards something. And then the conscious mind is going to try and reason why that's happening. Okay. Right. And if you noticed, the ability of people, particularly the educated ones, to rationalize their behavior is unbelievable. The mental gymnastics that they can do around a logical point. So trying to reason with someone that's coming from an emotional position does not work. So what you've got to do is you've got to connect to them. Now, first thing you've got to do in a conversation is make sure that if they've got a caricature of you, that you break that. Okay. Because they're gonna orientate themselves to the caricature, not you.
So how do you do that? Is there a technique to breaking that?
Yeah, there's a lot of things. Basically, it's a series of bits of knowledge that you need, and then you need to train yourself to do it. So, as an example, I accompanied the lawyers to a center of something that was happening, and then some guy comes up and he goes, "Oh, you're just a bunch of conspiracy theorists." I said, "Excuse me, sir, can I have a chat with you?" And I said, "Look, I can see you're very emotional about this, but I'll be respectful. I know you'll be the same." Now that's setting the scene, right? So you basically just be very open about how you're going to act, and you give the person respect, and a lot of the time you'll just get it back. Okay, disrespect is one of the worst things that goes on in a conversation, and
because then it's reciprocal, right? Like that, exactly. Then they'll just shut down, and you won't get a conversation.
And then I said to him, "But can I point out before we talk about anything that we're on the same side?" Okay, and he said, "What do you mean?" I said, "Well, I'm here because I care about my friend and my family and my community, and I'm assuming that's why you're here." And he says, "Yes." I said, "We may differ on the ideas, but our intention is the same." Now that changed the whole energy. He's God just come. He just changed his whole body language. Now, and we call this being in someone's corner, not stepping in the ring. But the key is that you can't pretend to do it. Okay, you can't just do it because you're trying to manipulate them. You've really got to find a way to realize that this person has been completely misled, misinformed, and that's why they're acting like an asshole. If you can find a way to get over that emotion and then connect with them, then you can shift them really quickly. I've had people where I've only had 3 or 4 sentences with them, and then I've seen them a month later and they've gone, oh my God, they're lying about everything. Because I was able to,
it set a trigger off, and wow, they went and did a bunch of reading.
Because what it is, there's a thing called privileged moments. Now, privileged moment is getting someone so open to assessing a piece of information that you're sharing that when you can deliver that, it's literally like a bomb into the knowledge. Okay.
Wow.
Now that's what I did with this gentleman. I literally only said 2 or 3 things, and it literally jarred him. So his RAS went, you know, that security guard at the door goes, hang on a minute. He goes off, he tore down his whole belief system in a month or 2.
That's crazy.
On his own accord. Because what it is, the most important thing is you've got to get someone to take one step. And sometimes that's the only thing you need to get them to do. Because coming back to the questions.
Well, I was going to ask too, is there any note on shibboleths in this whole thing? Because I've said on shibboleths, like a phrase or term that identifies you to a group. So for example, if you start saying like words, if somebody said a word to you like anti-conformist, you would kind of like, oh, I kind of get what group you're in. You're probably in like a neo-socialist group, that kind of thing. If somebody's defending capitalism, you're like, okay, that's it. He's one of those conservative guys. So I've encouraged people to when you're talking to somebody on the other side, instead of using these shibboleths that you would have, that they would label you in the enemy territory, to talk to them more on their terms, that kind of thing. So
it's really
instead of saying capitalism, I'll say the market economy, and it kind of diffuses thing a little bit.
Yeah, well, I'd never heard that. So that's interesting. We call it buzzwords. So basically, so they use it, and of course, what it is, it's identifying. So of course, you'll have that. Oh, you're one of those, are you?
Exactly.
So what we've inadvertently done is we've used the linguistics of the group that we either identify with or they identify as being in. The media has said if this person does this, they're that. So it's kind of this if-then thing. Now, the key thing, which is that story I said about that gentleman, is once you break that caricature, that's key. So in the Robbers Cave experiment, where Tajfel was working out what creates this, you know, the group splitting, it's identity. Sorry, it's creating the label, identifying with the label, and then comparing the groups. Now, what happened was that the study would never be allowed to be done now because of ethics, but they in a summer camp, they had a load of children. They split them into 2 different groups. They created a little bit of rivalry, and then the group started burning each other's flags and attacking each other's home. And it got so bad that they started to get worried they might have damaged these kids. Now, that was the way to create, you know, 2 groups that fight each other. But there was a solution. There's a remedy. There's an antidote. And what it is, you get 2 people to solve a problem together. So what happens is that they manufactured an event where the truck broke down, and then all the children had to work together to solve it. So then what happens is that they now see themselves as the same group. So the key thing is you've got to find common ground. So what I say to people is say, look, I care for humanity, etc. If you share those same values, we're in the same group. Okay. Now, it's better to show it than say it. So you demonstrate it, because show don't tell is massively important to hold of this thing. You'll never really influence anyone by telling them anything. You've got to influence them by showing them. And that's why stories and metaphors are very powerful. But just quickly, and you're probably starting to see there's so much to this, but it really is how you eat an elephant, bit by bit. How you learned to drive was each time just learning one thing, getting good at it, and then you put it all together. And this work is similar to that. You've got to learn things piece by piece, and then in the end you can drive, and in the end you become an advanced driver because you're practicing. So take one example, questions. That generally most people see questions as just one subject, okay? So imagine that there's a big red button on the person you're talking to, and every question presses that red button. But that's not how it works. There's almost like 20 different buttons. Okay. And 10 of those buttons are good and 10 of those buttons are bad. And if you press one of the bad buttons, you're going to get a bad response. You press one of the good ones, you're going to get a good response. So it's to know the distinction between the good and the bad questions. So if we go to that illusionary thing, that the person's under the illusion that they know what they're talking about. And this is important because we ran a project during the last 5 years where we took every subject and we tried to produce that subject in a nutshell. So we wrote a single page document summarizing the study, the points, and some key areas. And then when we started to write them, we realized a lot of them we didn't know as much as we thought we knew. Okay, so there's always this false sense of security. So so when and this is why they say if you want to know how much you know something, try and teach it to someone. So if you want to, so we've put on the course that we got on the website is this document and how it's structured. And what happens is, if you build this document for a subject, you'll then get an indication whether you know that subject. And what's interesting is that when we built those documents around all the different narratives and then shared them, they got no pushback. And they got shared a lot of the time because it opens in a very gentle way. It then states 3 really key points and then states a conclusion, which people couldn't combat because it had the back-end evidence. When you just make a conclusion, most of the time people are going to say, no, that's rubbish, because they've got different foundations to that conclusion. That makes sense? So a tip is to never give someone a conclusion, give them the foundation, and they will come to that conclusion. So coming back to the questions, if you believe someone's in an illusionary position on a subject, here's 2 examples of questions, and I'll tell you a study that they did to show this. Is that they went up to a group of, whether it be Labour or Conservative. That's so what's yours? Liberals. What's your other main party that you?
The Conservatives, and then there's the NDP.
Yeah. So you got the. So they would go up to one of those groups and they would say, by the way, I consult to so many different countries to try to keep a track of all these things is not easy. Right?
No, I believe you.
So they went up to one of the groups and they says, right, why do you support the party you support? Okay. What does the person do? They reason their emotional response. So they gave them a list of why. And then they said to them, can we donate to that party on your behalf? They went, yes, that would be great. Okay, so all they've done is they've got the person to believe what they believe even more. So asking them the why question, you only get them to solidify their position and justify it and strengthen it. So it's literally the worst question you can ask in that situation. The why question is a very powerful question, but not in that situation when they're illusionary about what they're talking about. But if you said to them, can you explain? Well, that's what they did. They went up to them. They said, oh, which party do you support? Oh, can you explain the policies of that party? What happens? The person suddenly realized they don't know, because most people don't know. Most people are voting for the jersey.
Yeah, that's exactly
the color of the tie, whatever they've inherited. Most religions is what people have been given. Not many people change. In fact, people change their sports team less than anything else. So it becomes embedded. So it's quite profound. So when they said to them, can you explain the policy? They didn't know. And they said, oh, can we donate on your behalf? And they said, actually, no.
I got to think about that. Give me a sec.
Exactly. They said, I need to think about it. So what you've done with that question is you've highlighted the contradiction for them. And sometimes that is enough to start to jar the system. And if you've got a good relationship and you've got a good conversation and you're being respectful is probably the most important thing. Not making someone look silly, all those things. You're inviting them to step in and observe their own belief system, and then they will tear it down in some cases. Now, there's a very interesting, there was a funny joke around Seinfeld where he's gone to this baseball game. The guy's hit a home run and he stood up and he started cheering. And the other guy said, what are you doing? Sit down. He goes, well, last time we were cheering for that guy. He says, yes, but we've now traded him. Goes,
he's on the other team.
You're cheering for the jersey, not the person.
Yeah.
You see, so basically it's to distinguish the two. That's why if you push against an identity, you really generally don't get anywhere. But if you can get the person to disassociate from the identity, because think about it, when people join cults or gangs or whatever, they adjust their behavior to the gang or the cult. So the identity is driving the behavior. Now, here's one massively important tip. And I couldn't resolve this because the studies were basically contradicting each other. But it turns out they're both right. Your beliefs and your identity will drive your behavior. But if you start to do something different, your belief systems will change. Okay? So if you can get someone to do one thing, whether it be critically think, objectively do something, they will start to shift their belief system as someone that does that, and then they can tear down their whole system. Now, what they found is that you look at during the last 5 years, that's how they got people to move from being quite sensible to literally, having certain fascist ideas. So step by step, and it's called self-perception theory. If you can get someone to do so, all they did was get someone to do one thing, belief system moved. One thing, belief system moved. One thing, belief system moved.
Wow.
See? So that's what they did. So they got them to,
and you can do it the other way as well. I mean, like
exactly.
I've heard so many stories from people in the gun community. They'll take somebody shooting that's never shot before and was anti-gun, wanted, gun control, and they go shooting, and then they're like, oh, I kind of like this. Yeah. And I'm kind of glad I have a right to do that, that kind of
I've seen it in my own behavior. So I studied this course to understand belief systems and learn how to change them. Now, I spent 6,000 going through these 3 different courses. Now, it's all homework and a few Zoom calls. Now, when I looked at how much homework I'd got on in time or actually finished, it was 10%. Now, that's it. Now, what I'm going to do there, if I'm not careful, is I'm going to rationalize. So I'm going to go, oh, well, I'm a busy person. Blah. So I'm going to come up with loads of reasons to make myself feel better. But if I can not bullshit myself, and as Richard Feynman said, the first principle is to not fool yourself, and you're the easiest one to fool. So I said, right, is that really a valid excuse? Well, no, I work from home. I can find, if I'm doing something half hour to an hour a day that's leisurely, then I could, and obviously it's important to relax. So what I did was, but the realization was that all that was going on is that I had an unconscious feeling that I didn't enjoy doing homework, and that came from school. So all I did was I used a series of exercises, and we put an article on the website describing this. And I literally, the only thing I did was this. I imagined doing the homework, and then I celebrated. I imagined doing the homework, and then I celebrated. I imagined doing that. So what I'm doing is I'm conditioning my horse to associate pleasure to the task. And this is how advertising works. Boom, 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 boom. So now I've done the courses again, and I've got 100% for all the homework. Okay? Because what's going on is that you will move towards pleasure away from pain. If you can condition your unconscious mind to associate pleasure to the things you want to do, then you can, in a lot of instances, depending if there's not too many emotional attachments and other things going on, that can be enough to do that. And that's what they did for me, because there wasn't any other real reasons not to, because I wanted to do it. I'd paid all the money. But the key thing is not to bullshit ourselves. Wow, that's the real key piece.
Yeah. Okay. So here's a funny thing. It's not about emotions. Ever since I went to college, I had to drive early in the morning to school. And it was a really long drive in the dark on a switchback mountain highway. And now every time I get behind the wheel, I just feel sleepy. Is that what that's happening?
Yeah, you're responding automatically. Now, if you can break those,
especially if it's dark and I'm sleeping and I'm driving, I'm just like, time to crash. Like,
yeah. Well, this is the thing. We would do a lot of the time. Well, there's a bunch of studies on this. It's called priming. Wow. Now, some of these studies are literally unbelievable, but they've replicated them time and time again. They would have somebody answer some questions, and if they primed them with words to be elderly words that you would associate with elderly people, when they left the building, the ones with elderly words left slower. Right? You are literally accessing the mental map in your mind of that concept, and then your behavior reflects it. So this is why the priming in the advertising is so powerful. So here's another key point. If you elicit a short-term goal, but you keep eliciting it, and that goal is away from long-term goals or values, that person can move away from that. basically, if you scare the shit out of someone every day, okay, then they can be moving towards something that they don't want to go towards, but they're just stuck in that crisis mode. And that's what you'll see a lot of people in. That they're not able to really do what they want to do because everything is just about so you can't, in the UK now, you can't even walk in a supermarket without them saying, oh, we're keeping you safe. Like, no, like, I don't want you to do it. That's my job. Okay. Now, this is what's fascinating. But see, all the viewers that have seen through this and seen that something's up in the propaganda, they really need to pat themselves on the back, because that's key to appreciate what you've done. And to realize that if you haven't got through to someone, it's not because they can't be reached. Okay, it's because there's a $1 trillion like head job been done on them. Yeah, and if you haven't studied the subject, you can't expect to be good at it. Makes sense. So I think having that thing where we don't judge ourselves for something that we haven't, you know, because people go to me, I've tried everything, and I can understand that, because it feels like you have. Okay, and the person's being so irrational and unreasonable, but we've been educated to see ourselves and work in a way that we don't actually work that way. Okay, so we've not been given the manual for how we work. Makes sense. And that's where, when I circle back to where we opened with, the behavioral science has got so many answers to what's going on, and then what we've done is we've broken all those down to the component pieces, put them together to see the picture. So what behavioral science has done over the last couple of decades is it's made startling discoveries about how we work. That has not been given to the public. You've not seen any big, oh, look, we've worked out, boom, here you are. You can, you know, look after yourself better. It's been used to sell us stuff we don't need, condition us to think thoughts that aren't true, such as, you know, men can have babies and all these kind of ludicrous things, right? Yeah. So because we are vulnerable, you know, we've got, if you think about a computer, we've got, you know, there's firewalls and virus protections and all these things. When a thought makes it in past the RAS, that isn't past that security guard that shouldn't be in there, then that's going to cause havoc in the system.
Well, and there's things that people are afraid of, because you see stuff like I'll just pop this video up on the screen. So this is Klaus Schwab, the leader of the World Economic Forum, discussing the future of politics with the former CEO of Google.
So if you wanted to design a Bond villain, how would you have him look?
This is the guy. This is the guy, obviously, the accent and everything. But listen to what he has to say here.
So technology now is, and digital technologies mainly have an analytical power. Now we go into a predictive power, and we have seen the first examples, and your company very much involved into it. But since the next step could be to go into a prescriptive mode, which means you do not even have to have elections anymore, because you can already predict, and afterwards you can say, why do we need elections? Because we know what the result will be. Can you imagine such a world?
Yeah, can you imagine such a world where they're not only predictive, but if they're manipulating the people, we're already there. Because
have you seen Robert Epstein's work on this? He's shown that Google can flip 20 million votes.
Wow.
Okay, I'd advise look at, he's a genius, the work he's done, and he's a Democrat, and he's basically calling the Democrats out because they're using all of this. So if you type, funny enough, if you type into Google election interference, they won't show you any results. They won't they literally, right? So this is what's key, that as a rule, we generally don't look outside of our environment for information. This is why people think, well, if that was true, it'd be on the news. Because most people's thing is, if it's not on this screen, then it is not true. And that's problematic, because, you know, people don't go the extra mile. And I'm pretty sure that a lot of your viewers do. And that's why they're going to be better informed. Because the truth, I think it was Denzel Washington said, if you don't watch the news, you're uninformed. But if you do, you're misinformed.
You're misinformed.
I'd rather be uninformed than misinformed, because at least then I know that I don't know something, and then I can ask someone.
David, would you believe me if I told you we've gone over the time? That's every time we chat, it's the same thing. Now I want to make sure everybody knows where they can get a hold of you, where they can reach you, if they have questions or any of that stuff. This one's always a hard one for me to remember because I just remember your name.
Yes.
But your Twitter profile is Reaching People, and that's at People Reaching. So if you have any inquiries or anything like that, go there. But then there's also the website, and that's reachingpeople.net, where there's a plethora of information. Go check it out. There's so much on here. A whole write up on David and a number of other people that you're working with, correct?
Yeah, if you click on interviews. Now, one of the other things as well, I mean, I don't get onto social media as much as I'd want to. Now, we've got another sort of 20 or so interviews that are not loaded up here yet. But if you go to the YouTube channel, we're basically suffering for resources. Because the project, I literally sold my house to fund the project because it was key. But so we don't have many resources, but we're trying to use them as efficiently as we can. So what we've got is we've got an uncommon series of workshops with Dr. David Funder, who's a political scientist and a philosopher, and Sinead Stringer, who's a behavioral scientist. And we're going to, in that, so David has written a book about how communities can get strong because they're being pushed from top down, but we need to be ground up. And we're going to show critical thinking elements, etc. Because the trap that a lot of people will make is they say they're a critical thinker, and a lot of people will do it intuitively. But when you can build that checklist, you can know how to articulate it then to the other person. And then when you're debating them, because the truth is most of the pro-narrative professors, etc., on X can articulate why they believe what they believe, even though their beliefs a lot of the time are nonsense. But because they can articulate it, people get a bit worried, and then obviously they don't want to challenge. Someone said to me the other day, how do you have the audacity to challenge a medical doctor? I was like, well, because I've studied every bias known to man. I know that he's not thinking clearly. Like, yeah. So this is what's interesting. But yeah, we're trying to get this out. But if I give a few tips, when you're talking to people, share stories, ask questions, use metaphors. So, as an example, I was on there's Panda, who a collection of scientists and academics.
Isn't that the what would Jesus do mantra? I mean, like all the gospels are parables and stories.
Well, why are they so powerful? Yeah, it's so powerful.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I was just a quick story to show. Well, in fact, let me do two final things. I was on a call with Panda, and one of the scientists that spoke out gave a 2-hour presentation. It was phenomenal. But 2 days later, I could not remember a single thing she said because it was all cerebral, it was data, it was facts. You can't retain that in long-term memory. A gentleman called Marc Giraudot, who's a French businessman, he said one thing, and I can still tell you today what he said because he used a metaphor.
Right.
And he said that product cannot work because it's like in a snow resort, they've put the avalanche barriers in the town.
Okay.
Now I can picture that and I can make sense of it because it relates to the term that it's not in a place where it can do anything. Like tits on a ball, it can't work, you know. So basically, that's why that was so powerful. And even today, I can still tell you what he said and what it meant. Now, there's a thing called deep canvassing, which, by the way, they've put people into fMRI machines, which measure brain activity. They can search and find out what brain regions work in, whatever. So what they've done is they've studied people to the nth degree to know what works and what doesn't work. So they have a complete list of how to talk to you and a way to influence you. Now, one of the techniques is called deep canvassing, where they literally go around, knock on someone's door, they speak to them for 15 or 20 minutes, and they can change their political views in that space of time. Now, and it's not being used ethically in my opinion, but it can be, because as long as you share the truth, okay, and you're doing it in a balanced way. But they noticed that when, and the deep canvassing script involves a story. When they took the story out, it stopped working.
Really?
It doesn't work without
that makes a lot of sense. That makes a lot of sense.
And Plato said, sorry, as Plato said, those that tell the stories rule society.
Wow. Wow, that's amazing. Well, we all know the story of Homer's Odyssey. That's like the oldest tale, and I think that we know of. It goes way back,
Yeah.
and it's been told in so many different ways, and it's a classic. But everybody can relate to it, so that's amazing.
Think about this. Well, Lisa Cron wrote a book called Wired for Story. So imagine the earliest men and women and children. How would they learn? They would learn from doing things. So they'd get burned, and they'd right. But that seems quite a painful way of learning.
Yeah.
Okay. That's where stories come in. Stories is how you can teach another person a piece of information without having them to experience it themselves and doing it the hard way. Problem is that if those stories are not truthful and they don't have strong moral codes in them, and that's why Aesop's fables and all the stories, that's how communities and civilizations passed on knowledge from one generation to the next. Okay. And what do we have as our role models now? I mean, 500 years ago, it would be like, you know, Archimedes and all the Plato and all that would be. Now it's like some singer that's going to be around for a year. Like, you know what I mean?
Taylor Swift. Yeah, unbelievable. So yeah, the website again for everybody, so you can head on over there, is Reaching People. Get on over there. The plethora of information, knowledge. It's absolutely fantastic. I can't recommend it enough. And I'm gonna have you back on the show again, obviously. But then what we're going to do here is we'll get into the Q&A portion of the live stream. For those of you that are watching this after the fact, the Q&A is available on the web, on the previous streams. So go check that out. But this video is going to air as a separate video. So let's get into this to see if there's any questions in the chat here. Revisades with the $5 super chat says, it is interesting how things like this can cause emergent behavior that can be harnessed and controlled. Controls like this are pretty damn dystopian. Yeah, I'd agree.
Yeah. Basically, the thing is that we are herd species. So that example that I said about the restaurant, we do have a shortcut that says if it's busy, it must be good. In fact, in a restaurant, if they flag the most popular dish, it sells more.
But what if you put a flag on it? Like on the thing?
Yeah. So basically,
even if it isn't.
Yeah, even if
it will become the most popular.
Yeah, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Now, this is why if you can convince someone that something is popular or everyone's doing it, you're going to get a lot of people doing it. And of course, yeah, so once you can give that illusion with big data, then you're going to see people start to behave in some quite strange ways, especially if you start creating sort of belief systems and all this virtual signaling and all those. Because in fact, what I didn't touch on is that there's a certain amount of unconscious drives. We see their manifestation. So you want to meet a partner and settle down. So that's one of your hardcore drives, is to basically bond with a partner and replicate. Okay. You've got safety, control, and some of the others, wanting to be a part of groups, all these things. So pretty much all behavior is going to come from one of those deep drives. And what they do is they tap into them. And the deepest of all of them is survival. So, of course, this is why safetyism is on such a big rise.
Oh, exactly. And David FL is saying, sounds like the COVID scam.
It's the playbook. It literally is the playbook.
So the question here, the polls. So is that kind of like the Pavlovian dog, I guess? You can
actually, well, you can shift the polls by the way you ask a question.
Yeah, and like I've been kind of documenting that, and it's interesting. You know, you look into the methodology of the polls, and they tend not to tell you much about what the polls were about. It seems like they're trying to shift the narrative in one direction or the other, and get people like how does that work psychologically? Does that kill people's morale on the side that is well, basically showing is not winning?
Well, here's an interesting study. It shows that all advertising in the primaries in the US will have an effect, but in the main election, advertising has almost zero effect, because most of the time it only has an effect on the swing voters. They're the key. Pretty much everyone else is just voting how they've always voted. Now that's starting to shift a little. That's where breaking the identity of the party is really key. Okay. So someone will go, I am a Labour supporter. No, you're a human being that votes Labour. If Labour stopped, you know, holding the values that you hold as a person, would you change your mind? So these are the sort of questions that people ask, because basically they're not. So there's a very interesting fable, which is called the Ship of the Theseus. What it says is that if you replaced every plank on a ship, is that still the same ship? So over time, okay, over time, if you so it's a different ship. So if you replaced every part of society with a different thing, but you didn't notice because it was done plank by plank, you could end up in a different
society.
You could be in a completely different society and you wouldn't have noticed because it was done bit by bit.
Oh, that's terrifying. That's terrifying.
But here's the good news, is that the reason that so many people are coming aware, because the contradictions are too strong to ignore now. So we have a window of opportunity that I think has probably not been seen, is that people now realize it's undeniable that the parties are now operating in lockstep to something outside of, you know, what they're governing.
With exception of like Donald Trump and Javier Milei of Argentina.
But when you look at that, the guy in Hungary apparently as well. But then but then also the question is, are they because a lot of the time politicians are controlled by forces at play, i.e. whatever lobbyists and etc. So, you know, really you look at the puppet master, not the puppet, is the key point.
Yeah. Well, that's a fair point. Revicades with a $10 super chat says, I once wrote a paper on the advantages of stereotypes. I initially got a failing grade because stereotypes bad, right? But I got it overturned as the grade itself was a stereotype. That's pretty funny. Yeah, well, it was a prejudicial feeling on the word itself.
Yeah, well, what he's done there is, which I only found out about this last week, because I forget the guy's surname, but there's a Substack, Toby Young or Rogers. Anyway, he talked about imminent critique. Imminent. So basically what it is, and I need to do a bit more research on it, but it looks really phenomenal. And it's how you get the system to critique itself. So you point out the contradictions in the system, and that's what that gentleman's done, because it then highlights the contradiction, and then the person has to change their mind because it's so obvious.
Right. That's clever. That's a clever way of doing things. Yeah. We got Trish Brew here, member for 29 months. Thank you so much, Trish. How does it affect society in protesting the government when they use lawfare? So this is this new concept of using the apparatus, like the judicial system, dragging it out and you know, bankrupting you through that. It's called lawfare. Or jail time using isolation or horrible prison conditions. Example, Tommy Robinson in the UK. Freedom Convoy in Canada.
Open the link to the website up. And,
okay.
And go to articles.
Let me just pop it up here and go to articles.
Yeah. And then trained like animals, treated like animals. Okay, if you scroll down, there's a table at the bottom, and that's the playbook. Yeah, that's it. Basically, the way to condition people, and they condition the unconscious mind, is carrot and stick. Okay, so you give carrots and you take carrots away. You give sticks and you take sticks away. So basically, what Trish is describing there is basically the stick. And what you're doing is you're associating pain to that behavior. And a lot of people will basically just stop doing that behavior. And then what happens is they then try and rationalize why they've stopped, because it's too painful. Now, this is really important, that when we become conscious of this, then our decisions a lot of the time will change, or we'll become aware that, you know, we're being conditioned to do that. And if we do it in a large number of people, then we can get things overturned. And that was like the truckers. You know, they tried to create all this pain and you know, punish them and all these things. But it basically touched into a really important thing for the Canadians. And that's why, I mean, we followed it closely from overseas. It's truly incredible. So this table is one of the most important things. And I want to understand this is pretty much, there's only two ways that people are conditioned. It's classical and operant. And this, and the operant is simple. It's basically all about carrots and sticks. Yeah. So you either give a carrot or you dangle it and take it away. You either give a stick, then take it away as a relief, or you give it as a punishment. So that hopefully that answers that question, because that's what they've done. And of course, like, because they do it with debate as well. So they go, you know, oh, you're not allowed to talk about that. So they create this Overton's window of acceptable debate. Now, it's really important to move Overton's window, which I'll do. So I'll say to someone, well, can we talk about some challenging subjects? Should anything be off limits? And then people will, once they've said, yes, we'll chat about challenging subjects, they often won't back out of that.
Oh, so Pierre Poilievre is actually is right now in his rhetoric. He's talking about the carrot, not the stick. And he actually said that, carrot, not stick, in his thing today.
Yeah.
When he was giving a speech. And it was because you know, in Canada we've been using the stick for environmental purposes against companies. And basically, like, companies would come in and they're ready to invest and they have money pumped into a thing, and then all of a sudden the regulatory body just says, "Nah, we're not going to allow it," and it creates this regime uncertainty in Canada, right? Where investors are like, "Forget it, I'm not going there. That's a no-go zone. I'm gonna, you know, not only like waste my time, but lose money in the process." And he said, you know, we need to create an incentive, like an incentive for these businesses to want to come. Yes. We need the carrot, not the stick. And I thought that was really interesting that he just used the analogy that you just gave.
Well, the carrot is really, see, in education, it should be carrot. It should be getting people to feel good. So that's how I used myself to get the homework done. I didn't punish myself.
Yeah.
Just made it feel good.
You made it feel like, that's amazing that you can condition. How long would it take to condition yourself to do something like that?
That took me 30 minutes. And what it's done, it completely changed, because I knew there wasn't deep emotional reasons for it. I wasn't doing it because of, you know, any problems. So basically, when conditioning is pure just conditioning, no emotional stuff, it's pretty straightforward. But I also condition myself off of croissants. I condition myself to stop eating takeaways and all these things, because you've got to realize a lot of the time we're doing something and we won't always know why. Okay, but we will not like that, so we will try and give a reason. Okay, but sometimes you don't know why. Yeah, but the conditioning is really, really powerful, because effectively, if you're not controlling yourself, there's a good chance that somebody else controlling you.
That's terrifying. Holy cow.
But yeah, it can be. But when you think about it, literally this data now is making itself out to the world. So then people will start to question, and then see, because I had a client today, and she suddenly realized it was OCD, and she said, "Well, I'm doing this thing, but I my beliefs, you know, she was a Buddhist. I want to do this, but I don't really want to go there." And I say, look, the first stage is really to notice the contradiction, okay, and be okay with it, okay, because what's going on? And what you'll hear people say it in their language. They say, "I want to do this, but there's this," and what it is that you either have two ideas that are pulling you apart, so you feel torn. They literally will say to you, "I feel torn," or you have two ideas that push together, and then they feel caught between a rock and a hard place. So if you very carefully listen to people, they will describe what's going on for them at an unconscious level.
Oh, wow. Okay, that's interesting. And you can pay attention to yourself and point out.
Exactly. Well, this is one of the, if you can observe your own thinking without being attached to it, yeah, you'll realize a lot of your belief systems.
Wow.
Okay, because they're unconscious, like that riddle.
Yes.
The belief systems, like the unconscious variables, they will a lot of time will sit outside of awareness, but you can see it in people's behavior.
But how do you see it in your own? Because, like, you know, I sat there the first time you told me that, I sat there trying to figure it out, couldn't figure out why it didn't make any sense. And the answer was so simple. It was right there in front of me. And you pointed out.
I observed my behavior. I said, well, I want to get the homework in, but I've only got 10% in. I just observe myself. And the key is to observation without judgment. So then you don't feel the need to bullshit yourself. So then you can just say, well, look at this. Boom. And the other thing is to really listen to like one of my ex-girlfriends said, oh, you're this. I mean, my sister said to me about 4 or 5 years ago, she goes, you always think you're right. And then I had to think about it. I thought, yeah, she's got a point, but I can't be. So then I realized, so it really lowered my ego, and it made me a bit more humble, because we do have this pattern where we want to think we're right. But when we let go of that, you know, then it just takes a lot of the stress off. And then what you can do is ensure that what you're talking about is correct by just double checking. I mean, it's like, you know, just, good, yeah. It's just,
I was just thinking, like, whoever thinks that they're not right. I mean, if you think that you're not right, you would correct that by learning the right thing.
Exactly. Well, this is where well, you look at someone like Richard Feynman, I think an absolute genius. So he says, you know, that first thing he says, first principle is not to fool yourself. You're the easiest person to fool. So he knows that. He knows within himself that he's going to do that. Okay. So the alcoholic will wake up and say, I'm not going to have a drink today. Okay. And the person that wants to lose weight say, oh, this week I'm going to. But if we can be really honest with ourselves with care, we can go, okay, well, I'll watch myself. Do I do that? Makes sense. If you don't, then you're unconscious. And all it is, it's quite simple. Your unconscious mind has got more pleasure than pain associated with that thing. If you can recondition those things, a lot of the time behavior will change. But, you know, that's the thing about that, we're being conditioned. So really the pandemic was create this thing that's horrible, so people move away from it, pain, and then give them this solution and tell them it's going to get solved, so that becomes pleasure. So then people start to move towards it. But the people that didn't do that were wired differently. They had different associations.
Yeah, you know what? That is so interesting. So a good friend of mine, he's a journalist. He writes for Juno now. His name is Alex Zoltan. He was covering some of these protests that were happening in Vancouver, some occupation at the university. I don't even recall what it was about, but I don't even think they know what it was about. And here's the interesting thing. He went there and he was observing just their behavior. And he looked at this protest. They were all the types that had the masks on. They had very structured rules. They had like lights out time. Not kidding. They're in this fenced in enclosure as an occupation with their tents. And they were very structured and rules oriented. And he came up with this theory that, you know, when people are protesting, they tend to go back to this comfortable feeling from their youth. So if you look at the Freedom Convoy, it was all these people, you know, Gen Xers, boomers. And what were they doing in their youth? Probably hanging out outside, drinking with their friends, having bonfires, all of these things. And he's looking at this new group of youth. And what was their heyday? Their heyday was under COVID, when they were locked down and they were told that they were heroes for staying indoors and playing video games and not socializing and all this other stuff. And it's a completely different dynamic for this different group of people.
Yeah, well, that's norms, and norms are the most powerful thing. So basically we build rules and unconscious habits from the communities, the environments. So you will watch, you know, we observe and learn very quickly. So you just, for instance, when it's, you know, you're in a hotel in a city, you're like, do I put a coat on or not? You look around. Is everyone wearing a coat? Do they need to do that? You know, so we do look at a lot of each other's behavior to see what happens. But do you know what the most powerful emotion is to get the most clicks?
Is it fear or
story? Nostalgia.
Oh, really? Nostalgia?
Yeah.
Why is that? Why is nostalgia grab?
Well, it's just a warm, fuzzy feeling.
Oh, wow.
Okay. I did a.
Is that why people like cat videos and stuff like that?
Well, that's that's a warm, fuzzy feeling. But the top 4, from what I could see from the research, was nostalgia.
Really?
Then it was comedy. Then it was pride in knowledge. The 4th one was actually quite surprising. It was Schadenfreude.
Oh, that's an interesting one. So for people who don't know Schadenfreude, it's a word that we don't have in English, and it's the like the joyous feeling you get at watching someone get what's coming to them.
Well, look at the foul videos. They go
Yeah.
viral. My opinion is that these all link into survival needs, etc. If you go back 1,000 years ago and your neighbor ate some berries and was ill, is that important for you to know?
Yeah, very, very important.
Exactly. So I think what happens is that the brain alerts at somebody else's misfortune, so we notice, so we don't make the same mistake. That's my opinion from looking at.
I think there's a very stark difference though. So say you take the same fail video, and you see someone actually get injured.
Yeah.
The rest of the video will be awful. You cannot watch it. It's unwatchable because every other video, it's like, is that person going to get injured too? I don't want to witness that. I don't want to see that kind of thing.
But
the fail videos, they necessitate that everybody's okay. You know what I mean?
Yeah. But you see what it is. It's when something's alerted to the brain. I think that's the key point. But you make a really good point there, because it is like that when someone's hurt you, but that's where it's painful. So you've got this mixture of pleasurable we move towards, pain we move away from. So yeah, knowing about something's key. So I think that's why it gets flagged up. But obviously you then don't want to watch it.
Yeah, then you wouldn't want to watch that. Like all the America's Funniest Home Videos. That was a huge hit. Incidentally, Bob Saget was not happy that that was his legacy.
Have you seen the Aussie Man reviews?
Oh, his channel's great. I love his channel.
I love the Destination Perfect. I can't watch the Destination F.
I don't know that part.
So he's got two different types of videos. So the Destination Perfect is where someone gets like hit by 3 cars, but somehow is still walking along. You know,
that's awesome.
They all just miss them. But the Destination F is where someone just gets completely wiped out. Never harmed, but like they might fall down and hit themselves. I can't watch those because just of the point you made.
Yeah, because it's gut wrenching. Like I don't like to see people get injured.
No, but the perfect ones are incredible, where like some guy will just do something, or a woman, like just incredible. That perfect moment.
Those are great. Revicades with another $2 says checklist. This is the way. Just ask any pilot. Yeah, that's great. It's conditioning with pilots to make sure that they.
Well, what it is, you're not relying on your current emotional state.
Okay, so it's just you just go through the tasks.
Yeah, the checklist makes sure that you create a quality assurance.
That's a really good point, because I'm a mechanic, and when I was training to be a mechanic, I would always, I'd wake up with nightmares. Oh, did I tighten that bolt? Make sure. It's nerve wracking. You have people's safety in your hands when you're fixing their car. So, but after time, it just becomes so routine that you can do it in your sleep, and you're not going to forget anything. It's always back together because you've done it repetitively enough times.
That's the key point, is practicing. Good practice will lead. This is the thing. I work a lot of sports stars, and when you get the emotion stuff sorted, and then you design some very good exercises and drills, and then you can get some really good habits in there. And that's what we need to do with conversations and sharing information and all these other things.
I totally agree with that. Absolutely agree with that. And this is what I'm doing here, having so many conversations. In fact, a bunch of them this week. Revicades with a $5 super chat says, responding to the polls, the old adage is true lies, damn lies, and statistics. It's all about how you ask the questions, lead people to the desired results. And there's some real truth to that. One thing I noticed was, I think it was Vesper Digital that put this one out, and it was how they lied with statistics on this particular thing. They asked people a series of questions, right? And it was, how favorable are you from, 0 being not favorable at all, 1 being somewhat favorable, 3, and then so on. You know how these questions go. And then somebody who ran this poll took the data, and said, it just took all of 2 through 5 and said, this many people are favorable and only this many people are not favorable about this thing, not showing, not divulging the information that actually, if it was given a 50-50, the people would respond completely differently.
Yes. Yeah, but this is, there's a lot you could say about this. There was Eli Lilly, a pharmaceutical company. They did a questionnaire for students, and it didn't matter what they answered. The recommendation was to take antidepressants. So they rigged everything, that it didn't matter what you answered. You were literally going to get that answer. Okay. And they do it now. There was a woman, friend of a friend. She went for a checkup. They said, your heart's working perfectly, no issues whatsoever, but we still recommend you take statins.
Wow.
Or whatever. There was, on that note, there's a very good Yes Minister clip. It was a TV show in the UK. I never really watched it, but apparently it had some genius bits. Now, I'll send you the clip. Remind me, Clyde, there's a 2-minute clip where he asks 5 questions to lead the guy to a conclusion. Then a minute later, he asks him 5 different questions to lead him to a completely different conclusion. And both times he answers, confidently, but it's the opposite answer. And
it's only 5 minutes between.
Yeah. Well, the clip in its entirety is 2 minutes. But this is called the Yes Ladder. So if you ask the right questions, and you've got to do it. I use it ethically, I think, because what I say is things like, we can respect each other in a conversation. It's important to critically think. If there's truth that affects you, would you want to know? So I'm doing it to get the person's mind open. But a lot of the time, people are using it to take them down one pathway of influence, which I don't think is an ethical way of doing it. I think it's, if you can get someone to be an open mind, then share some stories, and then you just let the dice fall where they may. And if it's the truth, then generally people do generally respond correctly to a lot of truths. The problem is that they've been so exposed to lies, damn lies, and a lot of bad statistics that they've come to some really silly conclusions, or irrational.
Yeah, completely irrational conclusions. And I always try to catch myself up in that, and that's the one thing. Like, you have to reflect and look at your opinions. So one way I do this is if I get emotional about something, like if something happens and it makes me feel emotional, then I stop. It's like, okay, train myself to stop, think about it. Why am I getting emotional?
Yeah.
Is it because I'm being illogical? Is like, if I train myself or what have you to feel this way? And if so, how do I change it? Right? Because obviously I'd like to correct that behavior, but I feel like this is how they sway people in a direction. Because as soon as you feel emotional, then you've shut down on your ideas of thinking about stuff.
Well, if the emotion's strong, the rational mind will shut down. So we're going to start them up again. We were running calls weekly during the height of when it was really bad, to show people how to release the emotions, because we have a set of exercises. I mean, I use it all the time. If I flag myself, if I'm feeling a strong emotion about something, then for me, it's a sign that there may be something more to it. And then what I find is, if I release the emotion, then I get clarity. So I have a rule that I will never engage or do any action whilst in a strong negative emotion. And it would, it would be sensible to do the same thing with a strong positive one if it meant I'm going to go buy that thing. I know myself. I literally bought a new laptop today because I was having some real problems with my computer. And while I'm in the store, I want to buy everything. You know what I mean? I was just like, oh, I want that, I want that, I want that. There's just literally, we've been so conditioned that buying feels good that I almost laughed to myself. Well, I don't need these things. You know what I mean? But that's just a result of conditioning.
Yeah, it feels good. I'm not going to deny that. I'm not going to deny that. Crikey with the 1999 super chat says, love this discussion. Florida, USA. Question everything. Liberty and truth is worth the argument. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Do you know what's so key about this is that this must be a result of the conditioning. You hear people in, like when I was in Canada, people were going like, oh, that's one of those freedom-loving people, as though that's a bad thing. Like,
I know.
So this is, again, a result of conditioning. So there's nothing more. See, as humans and pretty much organisms on this planet, they want freedom. And I think it was Jefferson that said that people that trade freedom for security deserve neither.
Mm-hmm.
Now, a friend of mine was telling me she was watching Question Time, which is one of these sort of shows where they talk about political arguments, etc. Now, they had a panel and they were talking about things. And then one of them said, oh, but censorship's a problem. All the panelists give them a dirty look, and then the audience started to laugh. Like, are we really being conditioned now that censorship is not only a good thing, but if you question it, you're crazy? Now, those people that laughed, they're not conscious of their response. But it was like, you remember the encore, you know about encore, when people start clapping or whatever. You only need I think it was in France that they did this. They would have a few people planted in the audience and they would start to clap and shout encore, and then everyone else would do it.
Yeah, it works that way.
That's literally what's going on, is that, you know, the Solomon Asch compliance study showed that you put 5 actors and one real person, a lot of the time that real person is going to copy the actors, even if they answer wrong. Now, what's also, this is why it's so important to stand up, and this is why the viewers, against all the propaganda and the emotions that everyone placed on them, that by still standing up, so important, because it makes other people know that it's okay to stand up. Okay. Mm-hmm. And the more people and that's why the truckers are so brilliant, because it literally, everyone said, right, I've got a tribe. I can now voice, you know, what I feel about this.
Yeah. And that's where I was when I saw the truckers. I was still working at my job. I didn't lose my job. So, and I like my job, but I had all this equipment, and I said, okay, well, I took what courage they gave to me, and I said, I'm just going to talk about it. I know what's happening here. I can see that the media is lying about what's happening. So I'm going to talk about it. And I don't know if anyone's going to watch, but regardless, and then it took off. It's crazy.
It feels good to do the right thing, and that's what we should be showing people. Like, education be about, because think about come back to the carrot and the sticks. How are people educated now? Right? Do as you're told, carrot. Don't do as you're told, stick. I was fortunate where I didn't go to a particularly good school, but I had some good teachers. And we watched 1984. We watched Animal Farm, and then we were encouraged to debate it in a friendly manner with no, you know. So I think that's where a lot of my, you know, love for freedoms come from, is from understanding those things and then building a foundation. And I tuned out to a lot of the programming as well. I said, didn't like home. But this is the thing. If you condition a public to associate pleasure to complying and pain to not, you're going to see that.
I just can't believe that the Canadian public just flipped so quickly recently. So like it's crazy. So because of the Freedom Convoy, everyone started hating the flag, and all these people hated the flag. They don't want the flags around. They even wrote articles about like, how could we ever love our flag again after this
racist event and whatever.
Yeah, all of that stuff. But then, you know, then they're prompted by the political class that Donald Trump's the new baddie. We've got a new boogeyman in town. It's no longer unvaccinated people or whatever. And now they're all wrapping themselves in the flag. One of my jokes, I went to a conference a couple of weeks ago. The big joke that landed in my speech was, you know, this is my second time in Victoria. I see you turn the place around. I see Canadian flags all over the place. You know, and the audience roared at that one because they know it's absurd. Yeah, it's absolutely absurd.
But it's like that meme, isn't it? What are you offended by? Oh, they haven't told me yet.
Yeah, right.
But this is the thing, and I you know, and it's, you know, we have a few jokes about it, but the simple matter, the fact is that they're just not conscious. These people have not realized they're under this false sense of security. But when people come out of that, and they are coming out of that in large numbers, then, you know, it's a lot of the time there's a humbleness that comes with it. that we are vulnerable, we are human, and you've got, you know, a big industry understanding how we function.
Well, and this is why I've been trying to tell people, you know, in my community online, when people snap out of it, the last thing we should be doing is like throwing hate at them and saying you need to be strung up or whatever, that kind of thing. It's like, no, they've snapped out of it. We need to encourage them to keep snapping out of it.
Yeah.
And, you know, give them the carrot, not the stick. There you go.
Yeah. Well, you see, because you can see all sides of this. If someone's been really abusive to you, yeah, then you're going to have some anger and other emotions to that.
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's some, you know, I tell a story of, there's one of the stories I've told the most, actually. There was a a lady on the project, and she was a trained psychologist and a counselor, and she went down the local park during the height of the lockdown with a couple of colleagues, and they had no masks on, any of that, because it wasn't compulsory, although they pretended it was. Mm-hmm. And they were just seeing if anyone needed any help, any homeless people needed someone to talk to, etc. And there was an elderly lady on a bench, and she started shouting over lots of abuse, and she's going super spreaders, murderers, and all these things. Now, Rachel was actually attending our calls, and she said she remembered in her mind, which I'd heard actually on a Larkin Rose course that they did, where it was don't step in the ring. So I did a presentation on that and talked about don't step in the ring. The minute you step in the ring, all you're getting is a fight. It's going to be so tempting, and the person may deserve it, but you won't get anywhere. And this is how they divide a nation. You just get them a fight amongst each other, and we've got to say, hang on a minute, let's not fight, let's talk. So then this lady then approaches her, and the lady's got a mask on, and she's shouting all sorts of things. And Rachel, quite passionate about it, she wanted to turn around and tell this woman where to go, but she remembered that, and then she put her hand on her heart. She turns around and she says, how can I help you, my dear? And then the elderly lady was taken aback a bit. She said, what you're doing is wrong. And then she politely explained to her, I'm a trained counsellor, I'm a psychotherapist, I'm here to help anyone. What we're doing is well within the law, etc. She said, what do you need? I'm here to help. And she goes, oh, I don't want to get emotional. And she said, well, you can. I'm trained. I'm here to help. She goes, what do you need? She goes, I just need a hug. Now, when you hear that story, you now see that elderly lady in a different light. That's a true story.
Oh, yeah. Your heart sinks for her, right?
Yeah. Because she thinks this lady in the park with no mask on is what's stopping her getting a hug from her. And this is the power of propaganda, and that's how they turn people against each other. And if we can transcend that, and that's what that Rachel did, she had every right to scream back, but she didn't. And then she said, David, it was incredible. I spoke to that lady for 30 minutes. So wow. She must have really got some information into her. See, it's all about, if you can't get that door open, it doesn't matter what you throw at the door.
Wow, that's hard. That's heart-wrenching. That's heart-wrenching, that story. Wow. Okay. Well, that's hard to move on from that one. Revisades for 5 says, it's like another adage to this. Every country has an army, theirs or someone else's. If you don't set your course, then somebody else will. Yeah, you're either in charge of your own castle, or somebody will come and
you see where this is getting worse now is because a lot of the armies are going to become, so you're probably all seeing it with the borders really opening up. You know, I'm already hearing murmurs that a lot of the immigrants are going to be going into the army, and they won't have the national pride. Like in Thailand, I remember one of the marches, the army refused to turn on its people, and they refused to fire at them. And that's what, you know, that's where a national identity can be a good thing, was that they will not harm their own. But when you've got mercenaries, they've got no loyalty a lot of the time.
No,
and that's where.
And then you have on top of that a disarmed populace. That's really
and that's a good point, because a lot of people don't realize that a lot of people in media and these other people, it's not that they share the ideology of the WEF. They're mercenaries. Whoever would pay them, they'd have that opinion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because you look how fast they flip.
Yeah, look at the one we've got in our country.
Well, you got Starmer, and then we have
Piers Morgan.
Oh,
like, what is, you know, what does the public want to believe? I'll pretend that's what I believe.
He's very skilled. He's very skilled at that.
Yeah.
And he can be convincing. Holy cow.
Reptiles can be very skilled at that, can't they? Like
but we have the politicians, like the liberals right now, because they came in for what 9 years, they all said, no, we can't get rid of this carbon tax. This is the most crucial and important thing, the carbon tax. Mark Carney comes in, he gets rid of the consumer portion of the carbon tax, and we've always hated the carbon tax. It was just Trudeau that really wanted that. It's unbelievable, and people buy it. People buy it. It's crazy.
There's actually a book called "Mistakes Were Made, but Not by Me," and it highlights there's massive biases. But the thing is, the people a lot of the time are they're convinced by their own lies that they don't even realize they're lying.
Wow.
Trust me, there's such unconscious biases at play. Sometimes they absolutely outward know, and sometimes you can tell the difference. But people become so skilled at the bullshit and that they literally believe their own bullshit.
So is that what a pathological liar is? Because I've met a few of those in my lifetime where they make up, like, they're totally bullshit tales, and they're provably bullshit, but they'll say it, and they'll say it like with a straight face. And have you ever met?
What you get, and
you often think, why are you even lying about that? Like, it's inconsequential.
Well, this is where you feel like you're being gaslit, but literally in their mind, I mean, and I'm like, I think they're joking, but literally, because what's going on, it all depends on the unconscious processes. So if the unconscious process is such a need for something, like to be right or whatever, then they manipulate everything. I remember having a conversation with a guy where there was a Top Gear video, and they drove a Toyota off a building to see what would happen, and it literally didn't. And he was convinced it was a Nissan. Right? And I said,
that the Hilux one where they put it in the ocean? They did a whole bunch of other stuff too. I remember that one.
Anyway, he wouldn't have it. Even when I showed him, he still found a way of and I'm like, look, you're hook, line, and sinker. How can you but some people, that's where also intelligence comes into play, that people have such flexibility to basically rationalize.
Wow.
Yeah, that's what you're seeing. This is why pushing against people will rarely work, because they will have the mental gymnastics to. So you're going to see a lot of people now go, I always knew something was wrong, but blah, blah, blah. Or I did it because of this, because they're going to try and justify their own behavior.
I've met a few pathological liars in my lifetime personally, and I found one set of behavior with all of them. And it was always, they're very nice. They're very, good people. And the lies soon become like a thing where you figure out that this person's lying all the time. And you're like, why are they lying all the time? And then eventually the lies end up, because, lies always have to compound with other lies. Yeah. And then at some point you have to question the lie because it'll interrupt something that's going on with you. And then as soon as you question it, you get cut off, and now you're the villain.
Yeah.
And,
that's
it.
Yeah. But the thing is, there's actually a primal switch in the brain that's always sorting for friend or foe.
Right.
And this is why learning how to break that caricature is so important, because all the studies show that they classify you as foe, they will ignore everything you say. They won't, doesn't matter. You could give them 1,000 solid arguments and not one will go in, because because it's called the polarity of beliefs. And what they did is you get two people at the opposite ends of the spectrum. And if you get them to articulate their points very scientifically in a paper and exchange it, you would think that they come closer to the middle. Do you know what happens? They go the opposite way.
Way the other way.
So in fact, if you present information in its raw form that violates the other person's belief system, they will believe what they believe even more. Stronger.
That's unreal.
Yeah. But knowing that, but this is the beauty about understanding this, is you can know how to present information to someone where they absorb it.
So I live in a realm, because I'm a mechanic, right? And I live in the world where it's like, if I'm provably false, the result is the thing doesn't work, right? Yes. It's the whole machine needs to work in synchronously, right? So it has to all be working, or the whole thing doesn't work. And so if I'm wrong about a thing, I can't play it off.
No. But there's the norms. You see, that's the norms of the industry, because they develop that as mechanics, you know that, and you've learned to know that.
But I take that with all of everything in life. I use that same philosophy on all things.
Yeah, but that's proper scientific method. And then you'll get people say they're doing that, and that's where imminent critique comes in, because you can point out where they're not. But imminent critique has a key function of it is that you're not criticizing. It's within the own system, is it's showing its own contradictions.
Wow.
And that's actually really important, because what happens is cognitive dissonance is really quite straightforward. It's two ideas that don't match. One of those ideas could be a belief, one could be a behavior, but they just don't match. So you end up with dissonance. The brain needs to resolve it. So imagine that you've got one idea is in that person's head and the other idea comes from you. The person needs to resolve that by rejecting one of those ideas. What do you think they reject? You.
They'll reject you.
Right? Otherwise, they've got to change their belief system, and change their belief system can happen. But if you elicit those two ideas are in their head, what do you think has to happen? They have to change their mind. Yeah. So this point really really confused me a few years ago, because one of the behavioral scientists was saying to me, we need to create dissonance. And I was saying, but that's not been working. And we were both right, but it was understanding you need to create internal dissonance, not external.
Okay, and how does that work?
Well, basically, you've got to find two ideas that a person holds that don't work together.
Oh, okay. So it has to be two of that person's own ideas.
Exactly that. If one of them is yours, all that happens is that they start to believe their own idea even more. Now, that distinction is so key. And there's a lot of things on the project like that where two things look like they don't match, but at a lower level, they do.
But people do this all the time on Twitter, because somebody will come up with a statement and has a certain set of logic surrounding it. And then somebody will find a contradicting tweet of theirs from a previous time and say, is this you? Right. And that typically doesn't help them. That usually
it will on some level, because now they've got to face it. But you see, if they do it, if you get them into an emotional state, they're going to have better ways to. But if you can be very polite about it and they don't feel they're being criticized, and it's safe. So if you PM'd them.
Oh, right. Get in the DMs and then you say, listen, I know you said this thing, but this is a thing that you don't
mind. Yeah, I hope you don't mind. And I know that you're a critical thinker. And can I just bring this to your attention? You know, if you word it well and you do it from a good place, you'll see them be very grateful a lot of the time, because
like the Dale Carnegie kind of way. He says, flatter people. You don't have to lay it on thick with a trowel, but give them a little bit of flattery and it goes a long way.
Just be honest. A lot of the time, because a lot of people are doing things, they're spending their own time, trying to care about things that are important. See, it's really, the thing is now, I remember when I interviewed Mel Nass, and I don't know if you've heard of her. She's in the US, does a lot of good work, really doesn't take any bullshit, very good at looking at scientific studies. And she said they've pretty much now worked out how to do studies just about to back up any claim. So people will be able to find a study to back up their bullshit. And see, that's the problem now, that beliefs a lot of the time are built on desires. They're not built on truth. They're what people want to be true. So when someone says, I'm a critical thinker because blah, 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 if you can find a way to show them that might not be true, but you've got to have a certain, because I did that with this guy on social media last week, and he just turned into an absolute arsehole, because, what I was proposing to him was so challenging. And then what I did, I got him with, he shouldn't really have that attitude, but he did piss me off. So, so I took the gloves off basically, and I stepped in the ring and I said, this guy deserves it. He's not being respectful. And I made a post about glyphosate, and I just made a pitch, because here's the thing. I know that eating wheat really doesn't agree with my body, but I had such a positive association with it that I couldn't stop it. So all I did was find a load of pictures of glyphosate being sprayed on it. And then anytime I thought about wheat, I thought about that picture, and I don't eat it. I haven't eaten it for
you just feel gross by that.
Yeah, I just don't want to. So I've got all gluten-free and whatever. Now, that was a very effective way. And of course, I would say to people, do it where you want to do it when it comes to things like that. Have your own free will and stuff. But I didn't want to read it because it made me feel horrible. Now, I posted up the pictures of it being sprayed, and because it gives a real visceral response, okay? And then he challenged, oh, where is this? And, where's the evidence? So, of course, I had that all sitting in a thing. So I posted all the evidence, and then suddenly disappears, okay? Because he was claiming to me that I wasn't providing evidence, but I did in every post. So then I replied, are you going to answer the question? Because he called me a conspiracy theorist, but he wouldn't answer the question. I said, what did I say that was conspiratorial? I asked him 9 times. He wouldn't answer. So then I posted, are you going to do, something about this? And then what happens? He just blocks me. Because it's so confrontational to him. So the key is you've got to be very gentle with pointing out somebody else's contradictions, because you'll notice that if someone makes a mistake on the road and you bib them, they generally don't thank you.
No, not at all. This is a great comment from Big D. He says, Clyde, what's the difference between MAGA January 6ers and Tesla isn't it the same psychosis? So, comparing the people who were involved in the riots at J6 in Washington and the people who are vandalizing Tesla dealerships and things like that.
It's going to be the same process as a play. And what you're going to see is that generally on both sides of divides, you'll see this. What's really fascinating is, because propaganda is propaganda, and that's why it's important that we transcend the automatic responses and we really think about something. Do I really agree with this?
So wait, just tell me if I have a bias going on here, because
we all have biases going on.
Right. So immediately my thought that came over me was, well, January 6er people, they came there not in the intention of rioting. And then there was a lot of, circumstances that caused a riot. Right. And riots, crowd control is a weird thing. But then I look at the people that go to Tesla thing and they're going there to commit acts of vandalism. Like that's premeditated. That's where my mind goes, but maybe that's because I support more the Trump side, and I'm apologizing for people and their bad behavior.
Well, you see, the thing is, because we have to check if we feel an emotional connection to something, there's a good chance that that's been conditioned into us. Okay, so then we want to be objective and we want to say, well, did this person, what policies did they have? Did they support this? Did they push against that? What are their behaviors? And once you start looking at the cold light of day, that tends to distinguish the emotions. But another key point is that they understand how to create riots, how to disperse crowds, all these things. So they understand. See, situational theory is really, really, really important. And there's a book that's called The Situation versus the Person. And it's one of the most important books in psychology. It's really difficult to read. It's a very big book. The guy that wrote it was an absolute genius. And he's got a TED talk called The Objectivity Illusion. And which I'd highly recommend watching. Lee Ross, his name is. But I sold my house, and when I used to live there, I'd take my dog, who's snoring in the background, a chocolate lab. Okay, I would take her for a walk from my house to these cliffs. I lived by the seaside, and we would cross 2 zebra crossings. Okay, one of the zebra crossings, never a single incident. At the other one, I almost got run over every day. Okay, now if we're not aware of what's going on here, we might think, oh, all the drivers at that one are arseholes. Okay, but if we scientifically test that, that can't really be true, can it? Okay, because
it wouldn't be the case.
It doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
So what it was is that the location of the zebra crossing was located in such a way that people automatically wouldn't slow down. Okay, because it's the design of it. Because they know that roundabouts in the US, the British designers went over there and they reduced crashes significantly because they had a lot of experience in how to set this up. So what it is, that you can create a situation, and a lot of the time with experience, you can predict the outcome. So what they can do, the people pushing narratives, is they can basically just change a few little variables and know that something's going to happen. Makes sense? Because the situation, a lot of people take their cues from the situation, not from their internal mind. They're responding automatically.
Right.
So yeah, so all you got to do in a in a situation is just agitate it a little bit. I mean, they can put a few people in there to start throwing a brick, and then everyone's throwing a brick, and yeah.
Well, that's what I was alluding to at the crowd dynamics in that scenario. But I've always come to the defense of the J6er people, and the reason why is because they call it an insurrection. And I'm like, well, for a bunch of gun-toting Americans, they showed up for the insurrection unarmed. That seems illogical. Right.
Well, there's also, I like to look through the details. There was a few things that didn't add up in various things, but I mean, most of these things, I mean, a lot of the time, both sides are being played.
I agree with that. I totally agree with that. And there's no way that there wouldn't be some bad actors in the whole crowd, right?
Yeah.
So some people taking advantage.
In some instances, it's all actors.
That's not outside.
Yeah, right, because the observational learning, which we touched on, is really what the unconscious mind does very fast. So, and there's a thing known as the primacy effect, which is the first information we're exposed to has the strongest effect on our mind. So, if they said there's another virus, okay, everyone goes, oh, well, we've seen flu every year, not a problem. So they have to use the word novel. Okay.
A new virus.
For the rats, it's novel. They didn't say new, they said novel, which means it's different. Okay. So then the RAS is alerted, and then they show a video of a person dropping dead in the street. Okay. So then the unconscious mind's going, well, this isn't just flu. Someone's dropped dead in the street. Now, did you, in the whole of that, ever see someone go unconscious?
No, never once.
Okay. But the unconscious mind doesn't work that out.
No.
Okay. So I remember going in the supermarket, and I had met Ed Griffin in 2004. So I was way back then, was known about the banking system and everything else. So I had actually read a document that they were going to do something like this. So when it happened, it didn't surprise me. Because there was a guy investigating for journalists who was talking about, there's going to be something, and then they're going to do this, this, and this. And I was like, whoa, it got everything like spot on. I go into the local supermarket.
Because those videos disappeared soon after, right?
Yeah.
That was early on, and then they never showed them again. Yeah, and they were kind of hard to find after as well.
Yeah. And then there was videos that popped up where they changed the location. It was clear. And then there was dummies in beds. See, this is what happens because we believe what we see. So if we're seeing these things, then we suddenly think it, and then then the RAS is then noticing that, the security guard at the door, and then it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. So I remember at the checkout, this woman goes, oh, I'm so scared. And I just said, oh, what of? She goes, oh, this virus. And I'm like, wow. So if I said to her, oh, it's got a 99.9, whatever, that made no difference because statistics make no difference to an emotional mind. So I said to her, oh, yeah, I can understand that. But I read, and I can't remember the gentleman's name, but I said, I read a paper by so-and-so that said your chances of dying for it is the same as a drive to work. Okay. That's a metaphor, an analogy. So she kind of calmed it. And that's the sort of stuff that can get through to people.
Right.
Yeah. If I'd have said to her, it's 99.9, has everyone noticed that statement had no effect ever? Didn't change anyone because it's logic.
Why does that have an effect though when people call you a climate denier and then they say 99% of scientists?
Yeah. But they're not. Yeah. But that's them reasoning their emotional response.
Okay.
It's totally different. Okay. So if you said, is it 99%? If I could show you data that it's split down the middle or whatever, then you start to talk to their unconscious mind a bit. But they're in such an emotional state that, it's not so easy, that one.
It's everywhere, man. It's absolutely everywhere. Here's another question. Ifonic Zen, member for 6 months. That's awesome. Says, thank you both for this informative discussion. It's quite fascinating. Would it be possible to enumerate the, what is that,
heuristics? Yeah, it's
heuristics.
So basically,
don't know what that is.
Yeah, it's not easy to spell actually. I'm not sure I could, but it's called heuristics. Now, in fact, there's a website called Decision Lab that's really good, and they're IOED. There's actually it's called the Codex. So basically, someone's mapped them all out. In the codex, I think there's 184. And if you're a complete geek like me, I went through every single one of them and studied them. But you don't have to go through all of them, because there's some that are much more important than others. But if you look on YouTube and you say top biases, top heuristics, some people will talk through 10 of them. On Udemy, there's some really good courses on this. Yeah, so it's really how much you want to take this. But once you see, for me, heuristics and biases are effects. Okay, so they're things that we notice from observing. But when you understand the drivers of those, then all the biases make sense. And the drivers are basically those things I spoke about, is that we're looking for safety, we're looking to bond to a partner, we're looking to be a part of groups, all these sort of things. So when you understand those, so one of them is that they will say that loss aversion is an irrational bias. Okay, but they're wrong, because biases are not irrational. Biases are survival. So here's how, and Rory Sutherland in his book Alchemy does a really good job of highlighting this, that at surface logic arguments, things look shallow, but at deeper, so I'm just going to make a note, so I don't forget to say this, but basically, so the school of thought is that people go, oh, the appendix, you know, we know what it does and it's pointless. Okay, so you'll get a surgeon who goes, let's just whip that out whenever you can. But it turns out the appendix isn't just for doing, you know, the tough digestive, you know, old greens that we used to consume. It is also a backup storage for bacteria. So it turns out that the people who have appendix out have 5 times more of an issue related to bacteria, you know, good bacteria in the stomach. So a lot of the time on the surface, people will come to a conclusion and then they will be wedded to that. And I make this mistake myself, that if I've got a problem and then I have one cause of it, it's called single cause fallacy. So if people, for instance, they look at why someone wears a mask and they go, oh, they wear a mask because they're complying. Possibly. They might be wearing a mask because they're scared. They might be wearing a mask because they don't want to be confronted. So it could be 1, 2, or 3, or all of them. Okay. Or
the you know, the norm of having masks was another excuse to just hide their face. So here's the thing in Japan, women, this is a phenomenon. So women got tired of putting on makeup. So they, when the mask thing came about, or I mean, it's been a mask thing's been around for a while. So if cold season, flu season comes around, they just put their masks on and then don't bother with it. They'll just put a bit of eye makeup and then that's their day. Yeah. And it's an excuse to not have to do a thing.
Right. What you pointed out there is one of the most important elements, and there's a book called Path of Least Resistance by Robert Fritz, which is probably one of the most important books I've ever read. And it's the unconscious mind will generally always take the path of least resistance. And then if you look at society, that's how so many, like fast food and drive-throughs and all these things, it's people will go for the easiest, particularly when they're under pressure. So the more and more, the less and less energy people have, the more and more they're going to take the path of least resistance. Oh, shall I sit on the couch or go to the gym? But when something becomes not the path of least resistance to you, like complying, so complying is the path of least resistance. But when you see the dangers, no longer is it the path of least resistance for you. So just to come back to the biases, and one other point I wanted to make is that they would go, so if I said to you, you could toss a coin and every time it's heads, I'll give you, you know, $5.50. And every time it's tails, you got to give me $5. Or if we said, every time it's heads, we double your money, but every time it's tails, you lose half or whatever. People, and then you put it positive on the gain is weighted slightly unbalanced. That makes sense? So every time you throw heads, we double it. Every time you throw a tails, you lose 40%. Something like that. Okay. People go, well, if you don't take that, then you're irrational. Okay. But if you look at the statistics, and Rory Sutherland, I can't quote it exactly, but Rory Sutherland shows that if you, over a course of 1,000 people, there'd be a net gain. Okay. But most people will lose.
Really?
only a few people will gain significantly. So as a group, you will gain, but as an individual, you're probably going to lose.
Right.
Because if you throw the coin 4 times, there's 4 options. There's heads, 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 heads. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, there's heads. So basically, most people are not going to have the positive. Now, so Rory Sutherland points out that so let's look at the real time. So let's say that you've got 2 lamb chops in your fridge. No, let's say go back hundreds of years ago, that you've got a couple of pieces of food. Okay. And you've got the option of going out to get some more food or protecting the food you have. What's more important?
People would side on the protecting the food that they have.
Absolutely. Yeah. Because if you have none, you're done for. If you have more than you need, that's not going to keep you to survive anymore. So you see that.
Not only that, you have a further issue is that now you have to store it and you have to make it last long.
Yeah. So that was Rory's explanation of the loss aversion, that we instinctively have evolved to protect what we've got, because if you've got nothing, you can't survive. So that's why people are so driven by loss aversion, that they would much rather, hang on to what they've got than gain much more. And it makes perfect sense when you look at it through the lens of survival.
Yeah, absolutely does. Amazing. Iphonic Zen with another question for 20 says, you mentioned that nostalgia and metaphorical storytelling have an impact on possibly shifting opinions. Are there impactful methods to shift opinions? Thank you.
Well, the 3 main things are stories, questions, and metaphors. Then within them is really learning how to, tell a story. So remember I told that story of the lady in the park, which, by the way, is a true story.
Yeah.
Do you see the emotional effect it had on you, Clyde?
Yeah, it really. Yeah, I did. I had to
move
on.
If I would have said to you, we need to have more compassion for the old lady, like, you'd have gone, yeah, but you wouldn't have felt it.
No, I would never. No, I wouldn't have without the story.
The story moved you, okay?
Mm-hmm.
And everyone I've told that story to has been moved. Okay, whole audiences have all at the same time gone, because now that's the power of story. So the question was, are there any other? For me, they're the 3 main categories, but within them, I mean, there's other thing is like, because you're putting information in the story. So another thing is to be really good with language patterns. So that's one thing. So we're literally going to start running a series of workshops. There's already a few up on the website, but we're going to start doing questions, how to, because there is lots of good questions that get good responses, and there's lots of bad questions that will just make them the way they are. But for me, it's when you understand where someone's coming from, then you can really relate to what they're doing, and you can, and then, this is the key for me. And that's why the understanding behavior piece is so key, because then pretty much everything starts to make sense. Okay. Mm-hmm. And because here's how I look at it. The way people are behaving is happening. Okay. And the things that are happening, not fake stuff on TV, literally stuff you see with your own eyes. Mm-hmm. So there must be a reason. Okay. To say they shouldn't be acting that way, or they're irrational and all that, yeah, they may be irrational, but they're still acting that way. If you understand why they act that way, then you get real deep insight. If you just dismiss it as, they're just crazy, then you don't understand why they're doing what they're doing. That makes sense? So the key is to understand it. And when you understand it, then you can start to work with it. And then you go, okay, well, if I say this to them, that's going to, well, in fact, here's the biggest tip I can give. When you're talking to someone, have a part of your attention on their response to what you're saying. And very quickly, you'll start to notice what works and what doesn't.
Yeah.
The big thing is that it's almost like we throw something and we're so focused on what we're doing that we miss the response. But I tell a story that I remember being over the park talking to a guy, and I'm telling him all these studies and everything else. And then I had an exercise that day to have part of my attention on the other person. You know what I realized? He didn't give a shit. He wasn't listening. Okay. So basically,
it happens. It happens.
Yeah. So I have to change my approach in that instance, or maybe he just doesn't want to listen. I mean, we've got to stop forcing ourselves on people for a start. But here's the good news: is if you don't have an agenda, opportunities come up all the time, and that when you get that privileged window, and you're prepared, you're not got an agenda, then you. So I had it today. I really got a really piece of information. Someone went, that now makes sense. They couldn't understand, you know, they talk about candy, funny enough, in the banking system. So imagine there's 10 of us, Clyde, and we're in a little village, and we want to trade with each other. Okay, but we've got no money. And then somebody comes in who's a banker, and he says, well, I can lend you all $100. Okay?
Yeah.
Okay? So now we've got an economy. But here's the thing. He says we've got to pay him back the money, but also with interest. But he never gave us the interest.
Oh, he just says at some point he'll let you know later what the interest.
No, but what he says is you have to pay me back with 10% interest.
Oh, 10%. Okay.
The interest was never put into the community. So we've only, so say there's 10 of us, and he's lent us all $100. So we've got $1,000. Okay. Moving around in the community, but each week we have to pay him back some money with interest.
With interest,
what happens? He gets all the money because there's not enough. But not only does he get all the money, he gets all the money, and we still owe him money. We can't pay the debt off because there's not enough money in circulation to pay the debt off.
Right.
See? So
you're describing fractional reserve banking right now.
That literally how you suck out the wealth of a nation.
Yeah, by siphoning it off through that. Now I would give a lot of arguments for why there are interest rates and why interest makes sense, but it's this whole like, why would he be lending them the money in the first place?
Oh, there's nothing. Well, this is the thing. Even a fair system, you could have things where, you know, things like that are okay. But we don't have a fair system, do we?
No, we absolutely don't. No, we do not. But I would never wish the barter system on people because that's very inconvenient.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, if the money coming into existence had no interest, but we were allowed to charge each other, but that money existed, that would be fine, I'm sure.
Yeah. See, that's it. It's the coming up with money out of thin air and then telling people that this has value, and telling them that that's what they can use as a means of exchange, and have to pay it at a charge. That's where it becomes a scam. I dork out when it comes to economics, and the theory of money and credit is one of my favorites to dive into. But I don't want it to derail and to get into economics here.
Yeah. It's not I know enough to know that the game's rigged. But
yeah, the current system, yeah, absolutely, it's rigged. I'm a commodities based money guy. Like, I think that money should be backed by something.
Yeah, which makes sense, doesn't it? Rather than thin air.
Yeah, but money by fiat has always failed historically, and we're watching it happen in real time. We got Dale Val with a $5 super chat says, "Help me, Clyde. The painting on the fire mantle of the bull elephant has me
hypnotized.
Hypnotized. Why am I struggling with that? I'm dyslexic. Incidentally, I know I read the news on the internet. Ask him to snap his fingers, please. So what is it with the bull elephant?
Right. There's actually a very interesting thing that's going on here.
I like the painting, by the way.
Yeah, I like it as well. So I've changed my environment to be super minimalist. Okay.
Oh, okay.
Because I went through a load of studies that children that grow up near motorways and airports have a lot lower IQ. Okay. So there's a thing known as noise. So your brain's having to record everything in your environment. So if there's lots of noise, it means that you can't, impacts your ability to focus. The same thing is true with visual noise. So if you've got loads of words and everything everywhere, your brain's always going to be processing that. So there's less so you can focus on the hand at task. So basically, I've reducing your space to be very simple is much more relaxing on the nervous system, but it's also going to allow you more focus. And you look at social media and everything else, people's attention span's almost nothing because they're just bombarded with too much information. So what happens is that on a screen, if you're watching like the share prices or whatever, if they've got more than one ticker, the brain just goes in a complete receptive mode. Okay.
Right.
Now, they also know that if they want to tell you some information you might object to, telling you through the radio is much more effective because when you're listening to the radio, you're generally doing something else.
Right. You're driving or something.
But I will snap my fingers to allow that gentleman to come out of a trance.
That's great. I do like that painting. And I've been, so, I mean, I've got this decor because this is a temporary setup, but normally, and we're in between places of residence right now. And normally we have some nice paintings and I miss that. I miss.
Yeah. Well, the takeaway for me was keep things nice and simple and calm and relaxing.
That's my wife always does that. She's got a really good sense of where to, I guess, the feng shui or whatever you want to call it.
Well, funny enough, that's the path of least resistance, because I ran a query the other day, and it seems that Robert Fritz's book, Path of Least Resistance, mirrors in many ways feng shui, which is keep things simple, unobstructed, so then you don't have to think about them. You can just move around nice and relaxingly.
So I was reading a bit, because I don't know much about feng shui, but I was reading Douglas Murray and what he wrote about. Was it Douglas Murray? No, Douglas Adams. Douglas Adams, the writer of The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. And he wrote about feng shui, and he said where really the practice came from was set up your house as if you live with a dragon. So if you've got an art piece on the mantle over there and this tail's gonna swing, it's gonna knock it over. That's not the place for it. Pick another spot.
Oh wow,
and
that's
it was his take on it, and he was talking about like sometimes overthinking tradition is not always the best way of going about things. Part of the essay that he wrote, he's talking about how they brought the Gregorian calendar over to these Asian groups in Southeast Asia, and their crops all started failing.
Yeah.
And so they quickly went back to their traditional calendar, and then they were successful again.
Yeah, it's really to think. Rory Sutherland does a good job in this as well, where he says, if you don't know the deep reasons why something's happening, then don't change it. Okay. If you can explain why, because someone will go up and say, oh, I don't know what it is, let's get rid of that fence. But if you don't know why it's there, then you can't touch it. Okay. So there's a lot of wisdom. And the reason that I really like a lot of the behavioral science is because it really does, it reflects Jung's and etc. that I think it really does show to explain the shadow and how the brain works and all these things. And there's a lot of ethical people doing research, and there's a lot of gold there. And just knowing how we function, we did an article around the adaptive unconscious that for me is one of the most important things to know. It's that part of your brain that you can't access that has such an influence on you. You can't see it, you can't go in there, but you can observe the effects of it. So I remember Brett Weinstein saying that he can go into a forest, and if he sees the leaf's been eaten, he knows that something's eaten it. He might not know what that thing is. So saying, oh, well, who are the people causing this? Well, you don't need to know they're causing it to know that something's being caused.
Yes. Yes.
Makes sense. So really,
yeah.
So you're like this next metaphor. So when I'm working with clients, when I'm talking to people, I effectively have to develop the attitude of being a blindfolded mechanic.
Okay.
Okay. We can't see inside their mind. They can't see inside their mind. So we have to get in there, feel our way around, change what we know, and then see if it changes the problem. Okay. If it's not, we go and do a bit more. And we have lots of tests. There's a thing called an EMI, which is when someone makes a picture of something and they get an emotional pull, it means that something's there a lot of the time. So for instance, if you think about someone you want to communicate with and you feel anger, that's going to be a block. And when you clear that anger, so a lot of the time when people imagine talking to someone, they're imagining a heated conversation. But if you imagine them listening and you talking friendly, it changes how you feel.
That's a great way of looking at it. Absolutely. Revisades for 5 says, that was the thing about Justin Trudeau. He could believe whatever BS was coming out of his mouth at any given moment. It was astounding. Yeah.
I'm not sure.
Did he believe his own BS?
Well, in fact, the thing is, they do hypnotize themselves, and that's via the self-perception theory. But I'm not sure if I should say the next thing. I'm going to say it anyway. So I watched one of Trudeau's speeches, and it really reminded me of Hitler. Okay, just the body language and everything else. So what I did was
Godwin's law. We got there. We got there tonight.
Right. So I sliced a video together of a few seconds of Hitler, then a few seconds of Trudeau, and as you watched it for its whole minute, like it was like two people following the same sort of body movements.
Can't you do that with like most political leaders though, if you really wanted to? Like
possibly, yeah. But he was so staunch in his thing; it was like the fist and everything. Anyway, I put it on social media and I got like a 30-day ban in like within the hour.
That's funny. I'm a big fan of Javier Milei, and if you put him juxtaposed with Hitler, you probably, because he's so emotional and he does his stuff, and but obviously they're completely different ideologies. They're not even close, the two of them. But I would say that Trudeau, yeah, if he was given the option, he would probably would have had the Knight of the Long Knives. That guy. Jam for 5 says, I think that's look at how fast people flipped on EVs after Tucker Carlson promoted the Cybertruck. Yeah, it's unbelievable. You know, Tucker Carlson, bad guy. Yeah.
Well, this reveals something important about human nature. Now, in that paper that I mentioned, Mindspace, which everyone can access, and I highly recommend they read it because it's really been, every country's got their own version of it. That one of the things is the messenger. People listen more to who's saying something than what's being said.
That's a good point. Yeah.
So that's what you're noticing there. So it's literally, it's 1 minute it's like, well, it's, you know, 2 legs bad, 4 legs good. Like, so it's literally just the mantra. And it really doesn't matter. They flip on it.
Well, here's another example of people going against their own interests, right? So the British Columbia government, who was run by the NDP, which is the lefter of the left parties, and they're very staunch about, you know, bringing on carbon taxes and all these other measures for climate change. So they have all these incentives written into the law to encourage people to get electric vehicles, and even to the point where they're going to ban the internal combustion engine after so many years. This is legit. This is a thing.
In every single country, same playbook.
Yeah, same playbook. But because of this derangement syndrome that's happening, David Eby, the leader, made an announcement that they're changing the actual rules for the rebate. So if you buy a Tesla, you'll no longer get any rebate.
Oh yeah, you mentioned this.
And it's like, well, but like it goes against their whole incentive. They say that climate change is it's the absolute quintessential thing of our lifetime. Nothing trumps it. Apparently, except Trump. Trump.
But well, it's carrot and stick again. But basically, when they're not thinking, but think about that, like, if you're standing up in a restaurant, the virus will get you. But if you're sitting down, you're okay.
I forgot about that. There's so many ludicrous things that you just like forget.
Yeah, but here's what's really key, because the driver is not sense. The driver is comply. Now, they won't know that. So if you see what happens is, now this actually, a lot of the time, the brain is lying to the person. So I touched on that study where in brain injured patients, they could actually determine that they could put something on the screen and the person's left brain wouldn't see it, the right word, and they couldn't say something, but they would behave in a way. So they would put stand up. The person would stand up. They'd ask them, why have you stood up? And the person would go, I'm going to go and get a Coke. right? So that's called confabulation. So a lot of the time people are finding a good excuse. So what happens is that the propagandists give a buffet of excuses. So when you say to someone, well, why are you in a mask? To protect you. So what happens is the brain comes up with the most socially acceptable answer.
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then if they're not thinking or they're not critical, they just, you know, water off a duck's back. They don't even think about it.
Now, so I lived in Japan long before any of this COVID stuff that happened in Canada or around the world. And they have a masking culture. They have a culture of, you know, and they do it for two separate reasons. So there's one season they call Kafun season, and it's like the hay fever season. And it's because of an industrial project from the 1950s where they tried to grow red cedar. They thought they were going to foster this giant booming logging industry. And then turns out nobody wanted to log. They all just live in the cities. And they have these mature red cedars that blow pollen all the way across the country. It's insane. And the hay fever is really, really bad. So they'll wear masks. So in that instance, it's for themselves. It's to stop the pollen dust from going inside their noses and stuff. Now, the other aspect of it is in cold and flu season. If you ever catch a cold and you got the sniffles and all that stuff, it's the opposite. It's for everybody else. It's so that you're not getting other people sick. But it's you're presenting with, like, you know, mucus coming out of your face. It's like that kind of thing. And we're talking about people living in close quarters with each other. And I often said, like, you know, Canada almost got to the point where we could have had that kind of culture, which I think is a decent thing. It's a decency thing.
Yeah, the problem is the effect it has on learning and everything else, because facial expressions are so key to human nature.
Yeah.
So that's a problem. But I mean, there's a lot of different cultures have different things. I remember being in Tokyo and I left a tip and they come running out the restaurant to give it back to me.
Yeah, because they don't do tips.
Yeah, whereas in the US, it'd be the opposite, wouldn't it?
Oh yeah, well they'd expect a tip. In Canada, they
Literally, I had friends somewhere in the US, and they hadn't put a tip down. They locked the doors. They wouldn't let them out.
Oh boy, it's like, well, make it compulsory if it's compulsory.
Yeah,
that's an interesting thing. But yeah, so what I would say is, like, you know, we almost had the culture of other people, you know, having that sort of a decency thing, but all the masking people became a bunch of assholes. So now anytime someone's holes. Wearing one, mask holes. So I like that. So anytime you see somebody wearing one, you just assume that guy's a jerk. Now, like that's what a lot of people.
The thing is, because you still get the odd person. I saw someone today, actually. I drove into, I live out in the sticks. I went into a place to get a few things, and this woman walked past. She looked petrified, had this massive, like, industrial mask on. Literally, you know, they convince people that walking down the street is dangerous. And it doesn't have to be rational, because behavior is governed by the unconscious mind, the primal parts.
Yeah, everything was closed except the liquor store here, man.
Wow, and they closed the gyms and they kept McDonald's open. Yeah, make that make sense.
Yeah, make that make sense is right. That's insane. Let's keep moving on. Peter Witten for 5 says David would be familiar with the man on the omnibus. Are you familiar with that?
Now that rings a bell. Why do I know that? Yeah, I'm gonna write that down.
I'm unfamiliar with it, so I can't help you there.
We have a quick look in my research.
The man and the omnibus. Yeah. I'm seeing other comments. The mask holes. People love that one.
Oh yeah, it's actually the man on the Clapham omnibus is a legal fiction used in English to represent a hypothetical, ordinary, and reasonable person. Yeah, I don't think we got many of those. Well, see, the thing is, this is why the education's so key. Because, you know, Voltaire said, if you can teach me absurdities, I can commit atrocities. That's what it is. Like, and that's why so many good people have been hijacked as well. So movements have been hijacked. So there's a large number of people that care about the planet, and now they're focused. They've been distracted by things that don't make sense, and while we ignore the things that are causing the problem.
Yeah, I try to convince people about this because I think, you know, in Canada especially, people are primed to really care about the environment.
Yeah.
But it's been hijacked by this climate hysteria.
With the green agenda itself, isn't it?
Exactly. And it's communism wrapped up in green. James Dullingpool calls them watermelons, you know. They're green on the outside, red on the inside.
That
so
shit wrapped in dog shit, isn't it?
Yeah, right. So but the reality is, like, if you do want to clean up the environment, it's actually the market economy that's the best way about it. And this has been proven, you know, country after country around the world in different times. Every time people become affluent, they look around and they say, this place is a dump. We should clean it up.
Yeah. Well, there's lots of studies around this as well that, you know, because there was one that Cialdini did was really interesting, is that it was in one of the national parks, and they was having a problem with petrified wood being stolen. So they put a sign up, don't steal the wood, we have X amount stolen per year. Now, Cialdini had reasoned on his experience that caused more people to steal. because everyone else is doing it, why shouldn't I?
Oh, no kidding.
So, yeah, because people, a lot of the time they look around. So if you're in an area where there's loads of rubbish everywhere, people will just throw rubbish because everyone else is doing it. But if it's pristine,
they won't do it.
Yeah, because they think, oh, it really stands out of place. So this is why I think this might be being done intentionally, because a lot of the bins around where I used to live are just not being emptied. And then there's rubbish everywhere. And then I think it might be possibly an excuse to put all the cameras up, because that's one of the reasons they're saying they want them up. But yeah, so
to catch littering,
so a lot of time, problem, reaction, solution, everyone knows all that. But the interesting thing about the petrified wood is that Cialdini then put up 3 signs. He put up a control one. He put up one that said, you know, X amount gets stolen. He put a different one that said, our forest is so important, can you please respect? Something that he thought would work. His one worked. It turned out that the one the forestry department had put up had actually increased the theft.
Wow.
So they were literally causing more petrified wood to go missing. And this is a lot of people, they don't understand the wording of the message. And that's one of the things that's on our website, is how to message, that you can actually make the problem worse. The interesting thing is he went and told the forestry department and they ignored him and they kept the sign.
Wow.
Which is typical, that you can't tell someone, you've got to show them. Right.
That's incredible. That really is. Oh, let's move on. Revasades for 5 says, I mean, he had a cracked skull and 4 bullet holes in his chest, but he totally died of COVID.
That is one of the things that actually made a lot of people aware. That contradiction is so big. I remember being in the supermarket, and I got talking to a guy, because like we could tell that we both were not wearing masks, etc. And we were saying, yeah, this is kind of crazy. He said his neighbor fell down the stairs, broke her neck, and they put COVID on the death cert.
Yeah, it's unreal.
Right. So, but when that happened to the person, a lot of people, then it made them aware that something wasn't quite right.
I don't know if you heard the case. I think it was out of Alberta in Canada, where the media used this child as a case of like, look, children are dying of COVID. Yeah. But they left out that he was like stage 4 cancer for like 3 years.
Yeah. That's selective. That's black propaganda, basically. It's lying. So there's 3 types of propaganda. There's white, grey, and black, and literally those are really problematic. We're actually bringing out a book that's called 50 Shades of Propaganda. But see, I saw one that had a picture of a baby with measles, and then someone had showed how it was one of the stock pictures that someone had actually just basically pasted measles onto this baby. So it wasn't actually a real picture.
That's just awful.
Well, you see, what's going on is that the unconscious mind believes what it sees. So what they do is, and the other thing is, there's a thing called victim identifier effect. As you notice, all those stories about a single person. You know why? Because the unconscious mind really responds to a single person. If you say 10,000 people XYZ, you can't, it's not really real. It's not concrete. You can't relate to it. But that's why I saw one the other day, actually, where it was man who claimed he would never wear a mask dies at 37. And then all these comments are Darwin Award, he deserves it, whatever. It's like people have lost their humanity. Yeah. But didn't say what he died of. Did he get hit by a car? Like, so you notice how when someone falls, has a heart attack on the field, they won't ever tell you his vaccination status, but you needed that if you wanted to get into a restaurant. Like, it's so this it's called the availability bias. The media are really, really good at it. If they withhold the information, people don't go looking for it. Yeah, no. And then they tell you what they want you to know to lead you to a specific conclusion.
Ravisades with another one here. He says there's no effective difference between science and magic if the science is significantly advanced. Arthur C. Clarke.
Well, yeah. Well, the thing is, all magic looks like science until you know the trick.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that's true.
And the thing is that this is the thing about point. And see, this is why I think what we're doing could be quite important, because when people know the propaganda and they know how it works, and that's why we're going to put that book out and do a few courses. There's a few quizzes on the website on this as well, is that, you know, when you know the magic trick, you stop falling for that particular magic trick. In Finland, they used to educate their kids to spot propaganda. And of course, then the kids were protected from it.
That's what I do with my kids. That's what I definitely do that with my kids. This is a really good one because this kind of ties into that. So there was a show on, I believe it was BBC, and the guy's name was Darren Brown. He's So he's one of those. Yeah, he's a trickster, and he does all these magic tricks, but they're like psychological magic tricks. And he had Simon Pegg, famous comedian,
the BMX bike, on.
Yes. Okay, so you've seen the one. So just explain.
I've seen all of his work. Basically, we started because he's really. I don't know what his opinions are. He didn't speak out, which I was a bit disappointed about. But I did have dinner with someone that has had him at a few of his parties. He demonstrates very well the effect of this.
Yeah. So to explain to the audience, so this was Simon Pegg. He's a clever guy. He's a comedian. He's not a dummy.
He's been in Mission Impossible and lots of Hollywood movies.
Yeah, he's fantastic. He was Scotty, incidentally, and he did a really good Scottish accent. In Star Trek, that's correct. And so he let him on this thing. He said, I want you to write down what you want, put it in your wallet, put it in an envelope. And then a month later, he had him come out to this thing. And they picked him up in a limousine or whatever, drove him around town a bit, and then took him to the studio where they did this presentation. And he says, asks him a series of questions, and there's a big box in the middle of the room. And after this brief interview with Simon Pegg, he says, so I know it's your birthday. What is it that you always wanted? The thing that we discussed a month ago, what was it that you wanted? And he says, a BMX bike. And so they open up the box and there's the BMX bike, and he's all shocked, right? What is it? And he says, now open up the envelope of the thing that you said you wanted. They open it up and he reads it. He's like, it says leather jacket. I didn't write that. I want a BMX bike. Like I've always wanted a BMX bike. So he was really convinced.
Yes.
Oh, and yeah. They show all the little cues that they subtly put
Well, he also did a handshake interrupt, right? So basically he went to shake his hand, then he stopped. So then the brain hadn't closed. So a window had opened up, and then he basically gave him a load of commands.
Right.
Like that stuff, like it. See, the thing is, the research around memories is quite fascinating. That a lot of the memories we have, a lot of them might not be real, and that's why when you're talking to the people that believe in certain things, they're convinced. Yeah, because that's what their brain's telling them, and that's why understanding how this functions becomes so powerful, because you can open it up, and then we can acknowledge our vulnerabilities. And then we can perhaps design a society that will, one, learn for history for the first time in history, but then design society so it works for the way that we're designed, not for the way that we're told we're designed or the way that we work.
It's terrifying to know that people can use this kind of stuff on you.
Yeah, but the window of opportunity is huge.
Mm-hmm. Solar with a $5 super chat says, David, please come back again for another fantastic conversation. My door is always open for you, David. This is absolutely.
Thank you.
Iphonic Zen for 10 says, the elitists choose the most brilliant hoax, knowing the climate does always changing and using the fact that they're trying to sell it as a catastrophic or as a catastrophe to install fear in everyone. That's really what it is. So
fear is,
fear sells, right?
Fear is the currency of control.
Okay.
So what fear does is fear paralyzes.
Yes. Okay. It's the whole headlights, deer in a headlight.
Yeah. Well, you got the 4 Fs. So basically, it's fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. So yeah, they know that the thing about the climate is it's salient. And this is really key. So that's the S in the mind space. So the mind space document, each of the letters that makes mind space represents a very effective way to influence someone. Now, the S is salience. Now, it's really key that if it doesn't affect you, there's a good chance that you won't care as much. Okay. The climate, they're claiming, literally affects everyone. Okay. And then I think Nick Hudson from Panda, who's an incredible guy, like very articulate, he says, he's got this sort of Hudson's law that if they say there's a global problem that you need to act on a local level, it's probably a scam. You know, that there's all this. So if you actually, one of the things I said to this guy I was debating where he tried to negate it somehow, there's in mental gymnastics, that I saw a thing where it said it had like 8 different front pages from news articles saying X is warming up twice as fast than anywhere else on the planet. And those 8 locations were all different places on the planet, but every one of them was warming fastest.
You can't warm fast. Fastest is one.
You can't have 8 number 1. You can't have 8 people come first. But see, you know what that's doing? Is it's basically making that salient to those people.
Yes.
So it's that cocktail party effect. So when your name's mentioned, so if they run enough articles, at some point, you're going to think, oh, my place is the scariest place. And then you're going to have more chance of you acting in the way that they want you to act.
And it's always like an immediate enough, but far away enough that it's like in this perfect Goldilocks region. Like it's not gonna you know, if they said it happened, it's gonna happen next week, and it doesn't happen next week, then the gig's up.
You know they're lying. Yes. Yeah, but that's the thing, because if you look at all the old videos, the amount of ones from 20 years ago where they say 5 years, there's so many. It's
unbelievable.
Yeah, when I was at school, they were telling me we were going to run out of oil in 10 years, and we were going to have an ice age.
Yeah, peak oil, ice age, and then it turned into, you know, global warming. And
they changed it from global warming to climate change, and now they're renaming it climate crisis and climate emergency. You know why?
Wasn't it global boiling at one point?
Yeah. Well, what they did was they had thousands of people on a Zoom call, and they were measuring their physiological responses to each of the words. It's not an accident. They've basically measured the response to these words, and which one scares people the most? Right, let's use that one.
Wow. Yeah. So it's all manipulation.
Yeah,
for me, it reminds me of indulgences, like the indulgence taxes of the I think it was like the 15th century.
It's luxury beliefs. Yeah.
I love that term.
Well, I actually, fortunate enough, saw, I think it's Rob Henderson. He wrote a book called Luxury Beliefs.
I just mentioned him the other day, actually.
Yeah, well,
in a live stream.
Yeah, well, he talks about the dark triad, and then it's called the quad, isn't it? Where Machiavellian, psychopathy, narcissism, and the fourth is sadistic. And you'll see a lot of that in certain people.
Well, I noticed that, like what he said, because I think he grew up in the Bronx or somewhere. He was a foster kid, and he made it all the way to an affluent school. And these people at this college that he went to, they had these beliefs, but they didn't practice the beliefs themselves.
Yeah.
The beliefs were for other people to adhere to, not themselves. But they believed them. They believed them like genuinely, which was interesting.
Well, it was really interesting because we actually shared I think I presented before him and then he come on, but I was really fascinated by what he said. And I was reading a book at the moment, going through for the research, called The Righteous Mind. And there's a few studies in there that literally blew me away. And one of them was that they were asking people about moral judgments. And it turned out that the difference between rich and poor people was that rich people were closer to rich people living thousands of miles away than they were to the poor people living in their own town. So the classes were similar from really just very different places. But the poor people found that it was a moral violation that if they didn't conform to the social norms, whereas the rich people didn't care about the sort of, so they thought it was okay to break those rules. And you see that in the people that go, you know, their rules are there to be broken, but they somehow make it a emotional feeling for the lower classes. And it could be a result of the conditioning, the schooling, that that's what holds them back from actually acting and breaking those rules, is the emotional feeling that it produces.
Wow, that's really interesting. Absolutely.
It's almost 5 a.m. here.
Yeah, I've got it. I've got four more questions, and then we're.
Cool.
Yeah, I was going to say, I said we were running out of time, and then we went on to do even more time with the Q&A. So Yodi Bear with a 279 says, "I see a lot of confession by projection going on," and yeah, a lot of people do that. Is that like an actual psychological thing that people do? Yes, basically a projection is a perfectly normal thing that the brain does, and it's not been a big problem in historical record, because generally most people have built their map of the world from experience. Okay, but we now get it through a screen with a bunch of bullshit. So then what you've got is that people think that's true, and then they project that into the conversation as though it's true. So you can't not. You literally, as you speak, you're projecting your view of the world. The problem is that a group of people are having a completely distorted view of reality. Like, men can have babies. Like, I mean, like, if you would have said that 10 years ago, that they could literally they could have news articles saying that. I mean, like, has someone got a side bet going on here that, you know? I can't remember who said it, but they said like everything was lost when they saw the male pregnant emoji. That's it. That's the line. There's the line. There's the line. Peter Witten for 5 says, "David is a genius. I humbly thank you for joining our community and hope and common sense. Let's restore the house of common sense." Yeah, absolutely. We need to restore that. Very kind. Well, basically, it's just. I always remember an Alan Watts quote, which was, "A fool who persists in his folly will become wise." It's just time on the mat. And there's an interesting thing we say about common sense. It's not common. No, it's not. No, it's not. And everyone that talks about common sense, I push them to go read the book Common Sense by Thomas Paine from all those years ago. It's a really good read. And it's also noticing, see, I know that there's probably a lot of things in my mind that I think are true that are not. Okay. That's going to be the way that we've been educated. So just be open, you know, that these things might come out. And if you observe them, you can get to see them really quickly. But that's it, right? Like, as soon as you discover it, then you can change. Exactly. That's why it's important not to bullshit ourselves. Yeah, don't stop bullshitting others, but look at yourself and stop bullshitting yourself. Peter Witten with another 5 says, "I should have used my what is this? Reapy Cheeps? I don't know what that is. Reapy Cheeps Atlas. I'm not sure what that is. I am sure David could speak volumes to the Chronicles of Narnia. Do you know that? I don't personally read much fiction. I know of Narnia. I do remember the wardrobe and the fantasy land. The Lion, the King, and the Wardrobe. I'm not sure.
Well, the thing is, these stories have such key aspects. I mean, Joseph Campbell did some really important work on that. And funny enough, he consulted to George Lucas on Star Wars. So you see the stories that...
well, Star Wars is an old tale, right? It's an old tale.
It's the hero's journey.
Yeah. And incidentally, somebody made a really, really good YouTube video that is Harry Potter is just Star Wars with crappy lightsabers. And the comparison is so perfect. So,
yeah. I just seen Reaper Cheap is a character. Oh, thank you. The gentleman Peter's been very kind.
Yeah.
There's a guy called Remy Gallard. I think it's Remy Gallard in France. Basically, if you watch his videos, it's hilarious. So he does things like he goes and gives police parking tickets when they're parking in certain places. And then he dresses up as a speed camera. And as the
I know the guy. I've seen the guy. Yes.
Anyway, but he did the Star Wars ones as well, where he waits outside a lift with a lightsaber. Okay. And then like a woman standing there, like giving, and then the door opens and then Darth Vader comes out and then they start fighting and stuff. It's hilarious.
Yeah, he's one of the classic prank YouTube channels. He was around in the early days. Ravisades with $2 says, "Here I stand, I can do no other." Martin Luther. Yes.
Yeah, when you find your purpose and it's called epic meaning, none of the propaganda will work on you. Nobody can take your values away. And that's where Martin Luther was like, yeah, actually, this is it. And someone actually said to me, like many people, this is the hill.
Mm-hmm.
This is the hill, no more. And that's the thing. When we can wait, because so many people, Matthias, wasn't he? Desmet was talking about that bullshit jobs. People are just so fed up. And if we can just stir that lion that's inside there, that they've got a purpose, they can make a difference. Because the problem is that the structure of learned helplessness and apathy is well understood. They know how to create it. A teacher can create it in the classroom in 30 minutes. But of course, once that apathy changes to action, and it really, the thing I always say, do one thing. Okay, I had a woman that come up to me at one of the conferences and she says, "Oh, I really need to thank you." I said, "Why? What have I done?" She goes, "Oh, you just give me the confidence to know how to say things." And she went to one of the supermarket's head office and she got the mask mandate overturned in 24 hours on her own.
Get out.
Right. There's hundreds of stories of that during the things.
That's literally amazing.
Look at the truckers, like just one phone's another. There's my dog in the back. But that's it. But you see, that's why you don't see these things on TV, because, you know, I think it was it Anita?
It inspires people to do stuff.
Yes, because inspiration is so key. That Anita Roddick said, if you don't think that one person can make a difference and you haven't slept in a room with a mosquito, like literally, it really is. Do one thing, okay? And then it will, if everyone does one thing, it's over really quickly. You know, we take the power back.
No kidding. Well, David, thank you so much for coming tonight.
It's been an absolute pleasure.
Oh, it always is. It absolutely always is. Stay on the line, but I'm going to end the stream here. Everybody, thank you so much for coming out for this. You can check this out later for all of those that don't know yet. There's a second channel now as well for all the long form content. We're going to be putting all the long form content on the second channel. So make sure you're subscribed over there. Put the link in the chat right here. The link is in the description down below. But where are we? Present the screen. This is the channel. It's called the Do Something Podcast. Right now we're live streaming on the original channel, Clyde Do Something, and we're going to be bringing this channel up. And the whole reason is because long form and short form content algorithmically don't really jive together. So I'm breaking it up to make a maximum approach to this, to get these stories, these conversations out there as much as physically possible to everybody out there, because I think everyone needs to hear this. So get on over there. You can watch this one again at your leisure, as well as we're going to make short clips of this so that, again, reaches the maximum amount of people, because this is such a tremendous message. So thanks to everybody for coming out, and thank you so much, David, for bringing this to us.
It's been a pleasure. I'm grateful of everyone else that stood up. Yeah, it allows it to happen. I mean, when all the doctors started speaking up, and it gave us evidence and facts. So yeah, everyone that's done something, just, you know, be grateful for yourself that you did something. Clive, do something.
That's right. Good night, everybody.